It's 2 p.m., and Yosha Populus is just starting an 8-hour shift at work.
In 2014, I had been living in Pritchard for 4 years.
Here you go, honey.
I was a certified nursing assistant, working a 2 to 10 shift.
Single mom Yosha works late at the nursing home to provide for her 2 daughters.
I had my daughter Janaya, age 15, and my daughter Hawaii, age 8.
Half-sisters Janaya and Hawaii look out for each other. But when mom's at work, Grandma Brenda looks after them.
My mom would be there when they got home, help them with food, cook for them, and see to them.
The family live in the St. Stephen's Woods apartment complex on the edge of the city.
St. Stephen Woods was like a low-income community. Mostly all the kids played together. You know, everybody would look out for each other's kids.
Grandma Brenda is there when Hawaii gets home from school, while her older sister, Janaya, is at dance practice.
Hawaii and my mom, they were very, very close. Like, they baked together. They were the best of friends.
Hawaii doesn't just keep her grandma entertained. She's a born performer.
She wanted to be a star. She liked the camera. She liked to take pictures. She liked to make videos.
Okay, go.
She's the queen of challenges.
Today, I'm going to be doing this hot challenge.
She was very popular.
Ice and salt. Because I'm just the queen of doing everything. I'll get it. Okay. Can I go to Kim's?
Okay, sure.
It was not out of the normal for her to go to Kim's house.
Kim is Hawaii's grown-up cousin who lives in the same apartment complex and has kids Hawaii plays with.
She would go back and forth from their house each day and play.
Later that evening, Janaya gets home from dance practice.
My dance practice will be from like 4 to 7, and then I'll get home.
Hey, Grandma. Hey, honey.
And I asked her, like, Grandma, where Hawaii? She was like, she gone over to Kim's house. I'm like, Grandma, you know it's getting a little late. I'm finna go walk over there and get her.
Kim. Janaya.
No one answered the door, no one was there.
Kim. It's Janaya.
So that kind of felt a little strange to me, you know. I'm finna call Kim.
Hey, Kim. It's Janaya.
Kim said she had been at the hospital all day.
Okay.
I just really didn't understand.
Kim hasn't seen Hawaii, so Janaya calls Hawaii's father, Hiawatha.
Hey, are you with Hawaii right now? We can't find her. What did he say? He's not with her. He doesn't know where she is.
So I told my grandma, call my mom at this point. Just call my mom.
I was having a normal day at work. Everything was going okay. And then, but they was like, they can't find Hawaii. And I was like, what y'all mean y'all can't find her? That's when I told my mom, I was like, call 911, I'm on my way.
I have to go.
As Yosha heads home, her mother Brenda calls the police.
We get a lot of calls of missing juveniles in the city where they run away from home or just want to be grown and go out and do their own thing, and the parents call and report them as missing. This case was a little bit different. Hawaii, she was only 8 years old.
The hardest thing to determine, first off, is whether or not this is actually an abduction, a kidnapping, or whether or not this is a child who is just missing.
officers focus on what happened before she went missing.
I made it home a couple of minutes before the police arrived.
Please have a seat.
My mom felt very guilty. She was actually blaming herself.
Those interviews taught us a lot, and it did show us that Hawaii was an extremely cared for child, and she was well known in her neighborhood. There was no indication that she would run away from home.
Hawaii's father, Hiawatha, arrives.
When Hawaii's father first pulled up, he was acting crazy. He was just so wired up about her being missing.
How could you let her go out on her own like that?
You have a father who's not in the household, but still loves his daughter.
Sir, you need to calm down and step outside. Okay.
But we managed to get everything calmed down to tell people to basically sit down, try and think rationally, and try and put all our thoughts together.
As news of Hawaii's disappearance spreads, fears for her safety intensify. Officers expand their search to the surrounding neighborhood.
And there was a lot of rumors that there had been a predator hanging around in the parking lot for a period of time. There was a lot of questions about whether or not there were any convicted sex offenders that lived in that specific complex. Officers were under a great deal of pressure just to respond to those things.
As night turns to day, there's still no sign of Hawaii.
That morning when the sun rise and Hawaii wasn't there, it really just broke me down and broke me over because she really missing, she really gone.
A dedicated command center is set up to find the missing 8-year-old.
We began to notify other surrounding law enforcement agencies, which included the FBI, also the Alabama Bureau of Investigation, and ask for their help.
Chief Rollins? Chief Rollins, welcome aboard. Nice to meet you, thank you. Grab a seat.
Agent Derek Taylor from the Alabama Bureau of Investigation joins the search.
St. Stephen's Woods apartment is on a very, very busy road. You know, there's so many people, it's a heavily traveled road.
All this kind of things began to go through all of our minds at that time. This is more likely to be an abduction of some sort.
Desperate to find their daughter, Mom Yosha and Hawaii's father, Hiawatha, make a plea to the public.
Anybody, anywhere, know anything, please bring her home to her family.
I've been up for the last 24 hours.
It's been 24 hours.
Been up all night searching. I hadn't had nothing to eat, nothing to drink. I ain't gonna stop until it's over with. Until she come home, until she in my arms. That's all I want.
Away from the cameras, her parents are less optimistic.
I was worried to death that something had happened to her. Or that somebody was just holding her against her will.
Calls and information begin pouring in from the community.
Tips were coming in everywhere. I think I saw her over here, or this part of town, or I may have seen this.
In a case of a missing juvenile, even the little leads need to be handled with your full attention.
One tip is a sighting of Hawaii in a gas station convenience store, half a mile from her home.
Our first logical thing was, hey, let's go see if we can catch her, on video.
If Hawaii has been abducted, video surveillance from the store could show who's taken her.
This could be one of the last times that Hawaii was seen alive.
8-year-old Hawaii Robinson has been missing for over 24 hours. Police suspect she may have been abducted and hope surveillance footage from the Best Future gas station will show them what happened.
The Best Future just had 2 cameras inside of the store that kind of looked over the store clerks shoulder out to where the customers are.
From the description that the grandmother gave us, Hawaii was wearing white shorts and a Hello Kitty t-shirt. And also at the time, her hair was braided and she had plastic beads in those braids.
They know Hawaii left home around 3:45.
Started 3:50.
At 3:59, they spot something.
Right there. Is that her? She's got braids.
We pretty much knew right off the top that it was her.
Go back to just before she comes in. Play it again.
When we see her come in, you know, that's key to us. She appears to be alone.
Shortly after entering the store, Hawaii leaves frame. She then reappears, coming down one of the aisles.
You can see she's looking at the merchandise on there, and all of a sudden she starts dancing. Like cheerleader moves. Then she looks like she grabs whatever it is that she wanted and kind of walks up towards the front of the store.
Let's stop. Punch it under. What's that in her hand?
It's a candy bar.
Okay, keep playing, but take it slow.
You see her stand in line, and she's just happy-go-lucky, just in the store. She's not in any hurry. She's not in any distress, it looks like on the video.
Just by her actions inside of the store, she didn't give off any indication that she was in trouble.
Every moment is scrutinized for possible leads.
Can you go closer?
There was a female customer that was in the store that was in line with her. They have some brief interactions, and it looks as though you could tell they might have even maybe have known each other, but it was kind of a familiar type conversation or familiar type interaction.
Are they together?
We needed to find her, you know, ASAP to talk to her.
Hawaii pays for her candy. But when she's finished, she doesn't leave. Instead, she goes behind the woman and seems to be waiting.
We wanted to locate who that person was and what kind of conversation had she had with Hawaii.
Hawaii then walks back into the store. As the woman finishes paying, it looks like Hawaii is coming to leave with her.
All of a sudden, she goes back to the back, off a screen.
Maybe the woman's waiting outside.
Then she comes back.
When she comes back, the mystery woman is gone.
But she actually looks like she picks up a drink and then pays for the drink. Kind of looked like that she carried on a conversation with the store owner, and, you know, that's the last time we see her.
You go back to the woman when she's waiting in line. Stop.
Agent Taylor saves an image of the woman for police to identify.
Do you have any exterior cameras over the entrance?
Without exterior coverage at the store, officers will have to check if neighboring businesses have cameras. But before they can, a call comes in.
The police department received a call from one of the public works workers who was working behind some abandoned buildings.
Agent Taylor.
He came upon a young child.
We've got a body.
When we got that call, I mean, we all just, you know, felt bad. This little girl has, you know, is deceased now.
I'm on my way. They found her. You stay here.
She was basically in a position in which she seemed to have just been dumped.
body was just sitting on just a pile of rubble.
The child was dressed in the way that we had initially been given the description of white shorts and a Hello Kitty t-shirt.
There were several indicators there that people were immediately drawn to. There were a portion of her braid had come undone, and one of her beads, the beads had come out.
Another piece of evidence that was found along with the hair beads was a piece of black duct tape. You could just only imagine what this little child went through. From that point on, it was considered a homicide.
After we determined that this was Hawaii Robinson, I went back to the residence to inform them that we had found her body. And as you might suspect, that was a really difficult thing to have to do.
I was like, where is Hawaii? And Michael Rowland just said, Hawaii is going to be her father. And I could just remember going completely numb. I was just like in a twilight, like just sitting there like, did he really just say she's gone?
My grandma was like, no talk, no nothing. That's the day my grandma's life changed, to be honest.
It's not a rescue mission now. There's a killer out there that just killed this little 8-year-old girl. We've got to find this person before it happens again.
The body of missing 8-year-old Hawaii Robinson has been found in an abandoned building. The woman seen talking to Hawaii in the gas station is found and brought in for questioning.
What did you talk about?
She told us that she asked Hawaii because she saw Hawaii put her Reese's Pieces into the ice cooler. You know, do you like those cold? Hawaii kind of reminded her of her own daughter. They both like the Reese's Pieces, and they like them when they're, very, very cold.
Did you talk about anything else?
No.
She indicated to us that, Hawaii was just as happy as she could be. She didn't look like she was in trouble at all. We were able to rule her out really, really quick.
With the investigation back to square one, detectives now turn their attention to Hawaii's autopsy report. It shows that she was asphyxiated after being sexually assaulted.
There is a sex offender registry, and that individuals that lived anywhere in that area, they were contacted about their whereabouts. Everyone wanted answers for her.
Bring up the sex offenders register.
We're definitely people that we wanted to try to talk to as fast as possible. Where were you? If you were at work, can anybody verify that? Detectives would go and follow up with that. And if this person was at work, okay, you're cleared.
We talked to virtually every sex offender that was in the city of Pritchard and several that were in the surrounding area of Mobile, and none of those became possible suspects.
Hawaii's funeral is held 10 days after she was killed.
It ended up being a very beautiful homegoing celebration. It really did. It's kind of hard to think about it because you just didn't know that those were the last days. My mom was distraught. Like, it took a major toll on her. She even told me that And once she found out what happened to Hawaii, she wanted to go be with her.
I didn't talk to nobody, to be honest. I went silent for so long. I caught myself questioning God. Like I just couldn't believe that happened. Still can't.
Desperate for a lead, investigators head back to the Best Future gas station in search of a camera that could reveal what happened to Hawaii after she left the store.
Officers were trying to locate, was there a specific person that, she was walking around with? Was she on foot? Was she in a vehicle?
They're in luck. There's a camera on a neighboring store.
Okay, she got there just before 4. There she is. Go back before she comes around the corner.
The first picture that we saw was her coming around from the side of the store.
Okay. What's at the end?
A parking lot.
All right.
There's a portion of the gas station that is not on video. There's a short little parking lot in that corner area.
Let's see if anyone's with her.
When we see her come into frame from the side of the building, she appears to be alone. Nobody's behind her.
All right. Let's see where she goes when she leaves.
Hawaii is in the store around 7 minutes. Then you see her on the video walk back down towards the end in that corner, little parking lot area. That's the last time she's seen.
How long would it take to walk there from her house?
20 minutes, maybe longer.
All right, go back to when she arrives.
The other thing that was important is that when Hawaii came to the store, it was raining. She wasn't in the store with an umbrella and wet clothing or anything like that.
The timestamp on the video when she arrived is 3:59, around 10 minutes after she left home.
We were able to piece together that, she didn't walk. She didn't walk to the store.
Somebody drove her. Go back further before she comes around the corner.
We started watching traffic and vehicles that are coming in and coming out.
Hey, stop. Zoom in. Keep going.
Watching the video, again and again and again.
Play it again.
Rewind it, fast forward, whatever we need to do.
It's gotta be one of those cars.
Finally, they spot something that will change the course of the entire investigation.
Stop.
Desperate for a lead to find 8-year-old Hawaii Robinson's killer, investigators discover a surveillance camera that covers the sidewalk she was last seen on.
And here she comes.
They analyze every detail before she arrives at the store.
Stop. Look at that.
We see this maroon-colored Tahoe come off of St. Stephen's and turn onto Bear Fork Road.
You can see that car kind of is coming down the road, but almost toward an angle, like it's going into that parking lot area.
Go back again. One more time.
It's definitely pulling over.
Seconds later, we see Hawaii.
There she is.
It looks like Hawaii arrives in a maroon Chevy Tahoe.
Go back again.
Unfortunately, we were not able to actually see Hawaii get out of the red Tahoe. We couldn't be 100% sure that Hawaii was in the car.
Investigators need more footage to be sure.
Do you have any cameras out the back?
The Best Future gas station had a camera kind of looking at their back door, but that camera also picked up Bear Fork Road.
The rear camera doesn't cover the parking area, but picks up every car passing the gas station. They cue the footage to the time Hawaii leaves the store. Moments later, the Tahoe appears.
It's definitely the car she arrives in.
That maroon Tahoe, it wasn't seen for 8 minutes.
We try to keep it simple. I mean, 1 + 1 = 2. So, I mean, we've got a maroon colored Tahoe coming towards the Best Future gas station, and then, seconds later, we see Hawaii.
Interior cameras record Hawaii in the store for 7 minutes before she exits.
And then exterior video picks her back up again, and then she goes out of frame, and then we see that maroon colored Tahoe that has yet to be picked up on that back camera go back down Bear Fork Road.
Hawaii riding in a maroon Tahoe leads investigators to a shocking connection.
Her dad, Hiawatha Robinson, had a maroon Tahoe, exactly like the vehicle that is seen on that video camera.
Because it was that maroon Tahoe, that's when we kind of really started saying, that looks awfully like the one that her dad drives.
Rewind to before it disappears.
In disbelief, they try to ID the vehicle.
Anytime that we get surveillance footage of vehicles that might have been there, we have the ability to enhance it to get that tag number where we can find out who was driving this car.
They can't read the tag, but they have questions for Hawaii's father. Investigators head to Hiawatha's address at his girlfriend's house out of town.
She was very, very agitated that we were there, that we were looking at her boyfriend for this heinous crime.
All right, come on in.
Determined to clear his name, Hiawatha agrees to a recorded interview. They ask him why his car was at the Best Future gas station.
Well, why'd you stop?
I stopped at the store.
The video, when we look at the front of the business and the back of the business.
I stopped at the business?
Yeah, that truck, your truck, stops. We see it at 1603 coming this way. And then it doesn't come out the back until 1611, until 411.
I'm talking about I couldn't stop. I'm talking about she couldn't have got in the truck with me. I'm talking about you can fingerprint the truck, you can do whatever you want to do to the truck, and it's gonna show you. She wasn't in the truck with me. She was not in the truck with me. You see her coming out the store?
Do you remember how many times did you pass by there?
Might have about 2-3 times.
Look at me, man. I mean, I'm a father too. I get it.
Oh yeah.
I don't think that you're a bad person, a mean person, or anything else. But we know something happened. I know something happened. He knows something happened. Something happened by accident.
She never got in the truck right here with me though. She never got in the truck with me.
Hiawatha vows he has nothing to do with his daughter's death, and the interview is terminated. The investigators are about to leave when they're stopped in their tracks.
Those cameras work?
Sure.
She indicated to us that she had cameras both inside and outside of her home where they were living together.
You mind if we take a look?
Unaware of her boyfriend's movements that day, she turns over the footage.
She would produce the video from those cameras for the police as basically a way to give Hiawatha an alibi and to bolster what he was telling the police.
The home security video and Hiawatha's maroon Tahoe are taken for examination.
We began going through that video. There were multiple cameras. There were cameras outside. There was a side camera. There were cameras inside the house as well.
Okay, bring up the camera over the entrance.
At 2:57 p.m., Hiawatha leaves the house, walks across the yard, and out of view. At 3:04, a maroon Chevy Tahoe drives away.
There he is.
Hawaii leaves her apartment around 40 minutes later.
Looking at the time of day that he had left, we were able to determine that, Hiawatha could get from girlfriend's house to the apartment complex in this period of time.
Okay, fast forward, see when he returns.
The maroon Tahoe doesn't return for almost 4 hours. Then, at 6:49 p.m., headlights appear.
Yeah, here he comes.
Investigators can't prove it's the vehicle seen at the Best Future, but they have concrete proof Hiawatha's Tahoe wasn't home that afternoon. He stops just out of view.
It's kind of out of frame. And then all of a sudden, we were able to see like a light come on.
The light in the car.
It was someone that was opening up the back of the Tahoe, and that was the dome light of inside the car that was coming on that you could see from the surveillance camera. Dome light goes off. We don't see anything for several minutes.
What's he doing? Wasn't he coming inside?
We didn't know if he was cleaning up something or in the car. At that time, we just didn't know. Then all of a sudden, you see a figure come running from the side and coming running towards into the house, kind of wearing all black.
They switch to the interior camera.
The house was dark, and then all of a sudden, we see lights come on inside of the house in like the kitchen area. And then we see Hiawatha come into frame.
All right, stop it. Zoom in. It's definitely him.
We see Hiawatha come into the kitchen holding something and walk into the laundry room.
He goes into the house, he does some laundry. You see him going in and out of the laundry room. You see him go back to the Tahoe.
Did he go back outside?
Why would he be going back to the car? And why would he be doing any of that in the rain?
A minute later, he runs back to the house again.
Go back. Stop. Zoom in. What's that?
It looks like he's carrying some type of cloth in his hand or something in his hand.
We see Hiawatha walk into the laundry room. We see him come back and forth several times.
Stop. He's naked.
One of the last times we see him, he comes back out of the laundry room, shirtless.
Play that again.
You couldn't see exactly what was going on, but it looked very suspicious.
A video speaks volumes, was making the hair on the back of our neck stand up as to, okay, we really might have something going on here.
Officers investigating the murder of 8-year-old Hawaii Robinson are in disbelief, as surveillance video shows her father could be involved.
Rewind. Play it again.
He's in and out in the rain to the Tahoe, changing clothes in the laundry room multiple times. His girlfriend said he never did laundry. All of those things looked very suspicious.
The home security video confirms Hiawatha had the opportunity to abduct and kill his own daughter. Now investigators need hard evidence to prove he was with Hawaii, and turn to the forensics team to find it.
Some of the evidence that was found inside of that vehicle were black duct tape, a hair bead. Yosha, the mom, had explained to us that, a couple of days prior to her going missing, she had those clear hair beads put into her hair. And according to mom and the family, she had not seen her dad or been with her dad in that time frame.
Basically what it told us was that she had been in that Tahoe, even though Hiawatha had said that she had not been in it.
Also, the duct tape that was found inside of the Tahoe and that was found at the crime scene was determined to be from the same roll of duct tape. When we found this evidence inside the car and at the crime scene, that linked the father, Hiawatha Robinson, to this crime.
Hiawatha's phone records also confirmed detectives' suspicions.
His phone was hitting off cell phone towers in the area of the Best Future gas station, hitting off of towers close to where the body was actually discovered.
Look. If it were Hawaii was, her father was in the same areas. We need to get a warrant.
On December 16th, 2014, Hiawatha Robinson is arrested.
The day that he was arrested for the murder of his daughter, we brought him back to the FBI office where he agreed to talk to us.
We believe that you picked her up. You took her, something happened. We do not believe that you intended for her to die, but she died. You put her body in the back of your Tahoe.
See, that's what you're saying.
But I know she was in the back of your car. I know that. That's not a guess.
So you say she was in the back of the car?
Yes.
That's what you're saying, right?
I'm saying the evidence says that. I didn't see that. I'm saying the evidence. Her hair beads in your car. That very same tape that's on the scene is in your car. That's not a guess. That's an absolute fact. And you know it's a fact.
It's the first time I ever heard that.
It's there.
So tell me what you're saying.
I'm saying you picked up your little girl, you took her, you sodomized her, and she died in the course of being sodomized, and then you panicked.
Is you for real?
That's exactly what I say happened.
Is you for real?
Yep.
Is you dick for real?
I'm very real.
You making up stuff, man. You making up stuff. You sitting right here, you just sitting here just in my face just telling me a lie. That's what you're doing. And I'm telling you, telling me a lie.
Okay. What do you need for me to prove it to you?
I'm talking you got all the answers. You the one saying this stuff.
There's a warrant for your arrest for murder.
Okay.
There's a warrant for your arrest for sodomy. Okay?
Come on, man.
You are gonna go to jail today for those two charges.
He ended the interview. He basically told us he's not saying another word to us.
I've been up for the last 24 hours.
It's been 24
Been up all night searching. I hadn't had nothing to eat, nothing to drink. I ain't gonna stop until it's over with.
Hiawatha Robinson is found guilty of killing his daughter during a sexual assault.
And Hiawatha has never admitted that he was the perpetrator in this case and has never shown any remorse for what happened.
He is sentenced to 100 years in prison for Hawaii's murder.
He took away an 8-year-old girl's innocence. A little girl who loved him and trusted him.
Knowing that her dad is the one did this has been the hardest part to accept. That the person that's supposed to protect, love her, took advantage of her.
I would describe Hiawatha Robinson Jr. as a psychopath. I mean, what kind of monster does that to their own child?
Investigators are in no doubt about the part surveillance video played, bringing Hiawatha to justice.
It was a very circumstantial case, and every little bitty piece of it counted. I believe the surveillance video was a very crucial part of the case being presented to the jury.
I don't know if we'd be where we are today if we didn't have it.
The crucial images of Hawaii's last moments alive are also a poignant reminder of a sister and daughter taken too soon.
That just made me feel like they had no type of heart, no Like, how could you, like, I couldn't even go out there, couldn't look, couldn't listen, because I just didn't even want to believe it.
It's like if somebody just grab you by the gut and just start twisting it up to the point where you're just so sick you want to just throw up or maybe even die.
If I could speak to Hawaii one last time, I asked her why she didn't tell us nothing. And she know we would have protected her. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I just feel like I failed her because I met him. I brought him into my world. We brought her into the world, but it's just like, it's just really, it's very, very, very tough to accept.
There is a specific kind of darkness that descends upon a small town when innocence is abruptly and violently torn away. It is not just the physical absence of light when the sun dips below the horizon, but a suffocating, heavy dread that settles over every street, every home, and every mind. In the spring of 1946, this precise brand of terror enveloped the town of Texarkana. Situated uniquely on the geographical border between the states of Texas and Arkansas, Texarkana was a place of quiet routines and close-knit neighborhoods. It was a community that shared everything, from local commerce to daily gossip, seamlessly existing across a state line. However, during that fateful spring, the residents of this dual-state town found themselves sharing something entirely different. They shared a paralyzing, collective nightmare, orchestrated by a faceless figure who would soon become known to history as the Phantom Killer. The season of spring is universally associated with rebirth, blooming life, and a sense of renewed hope. The harshness of winter fades, and the evenings grow warmer, inviting people to step outside and enjoy the gentle breeze. For the young people of Texarkana, the weekends during this spring of 1946 were meant to be a time of courtship, quiet conversations, and innocent romance. In an era long before the digital age, privacy was a precious commodity for teenagers and young adults. To find a moment alone, away from the watchful eyes of parents and siblings, young couples would drive their automobiles out to the secluded, unpaved roads on the outskirts of the town. These quiet, wooded areas were affectionately known as lovers' lanes. They were isolated stretches of dirt and gravel, surrounded by dense trees, offering a tranquil sanctuary where couples could park their cars, talk, and share moments of intimacy under the cover of the night sky. These parked cars, idling in the dark, were supposed to be safe havens. They were fragile metal bubbles containing youth, laughter, and the promise of the future. But the isolation that made these lovers' lanes so appealing to young couples also made them the perfect hunting ground for a predator. The dense woods that provided privacy also provided concealment for someone watching from the shadows. The quietness of the secluded roads meant that a scream for help would simply vanish into the night air, unheard by anyone who could intervene. The couples sitting in the front seats of their vehicles, completely absorbed in one another, were entirely oblivious to the profound danger lurking just beyond their windshields. They had no reason to believe that their quiet weekend rendezvous would intersect with absolute, unadulterated evil. Out of this darkness emerged a figure that seemed to defy all human reason and empathy. The perpetrator did not show his face, denying his victims even the basic humanity of looking their attacker in the eye. Instead, he concealed his identity in the most crude, unsettling manner imaginable. The killer wore a simple, plain white sack pulled entirely over his head. Two jagged, small holes were cut into the fabric, allowing him just enough vision to survey the terror he was about to inflict. This makeshift mask transformed an ordinary man into an unrecognizable, ghostly apparition. It was an image of pure, raw horror. The white sack eliminated any discernible facial features, any hint of emotion, and any trace of identity. It left nothing but a blank, terrifying canvas of white cloth in the moonlight, a visual representation of the senseless brutality he was about to unleash. The Phantom Killer operated with a ruthless and devastating methodology. He targeted the parked cars in these desolate lovers' lanes late at night, moving silently through the darkness until he reached the unsuspecting couples. The sudden appearance of the masked figure in the window of a car was the beginning of an unimaginable ordeal. Utilizing a firearm to immediately establish control, he overwhelmed his victims through absolute surprise and the undeniable threat of lethal force. The couples, trapped in the confined space of their vehicles, had no means of escape and no way to defend themselves against a suddenly drawn weapon held by a faceless phantom. The sheer psychological shock of the white sack, combined with the presence of a gun, guaranteed immediate submission from the terrified youth. What followed was a horrific display of extreme, targeted violence. The killer exhibited a specific and savage pattern in his attacks. The male victims were subjected to incredibly vicious, merciless beatings. The physical assault on the young men was profound and agonizing, intended to incapacitate them entirely and inflict maximum suffering. But the true depth of the killer's depravity was reserved for the female victims. After neutralizing the men through extreme physical violence, the masked perpetrator turned his attention to the young women. These women were subjected to the most horrific violations, suffering severe sexual assault and rape before being fatally shot. The brutality was absolute. The killer showed no hesitation, no mercy, and no remorse. He stripped these young women of their dignity, their safety, and ultimately, their lives, leaving behind a trail of shattered families and broken futures. The pace of the violence only compounded the escalating terror. This was not a single, isolated tragedy that the town could slowly mourn and process. It was a sustained campaign of horror that lasted for 10 agonizing weeks. Over the course of those 2.5 months, the Phantom Killer struck 4 separate times. The frequency of the attacks meant that just as the community began to catch its breath from one horrific discovery, another tragedy would strike. The death toll steadily climbed. 5 young people were brutally murdered, their lives extinguished in the dark woods on the edge of town. 3 others survived the ordeal, but they were left with devastating physical injuries and the permanent, haunting psychological trauma of having faced the masked killer and lived. 8 victims in total, their lives forever altered or completely erased in the span of just 10 weeks. The profound impact of these crimes on the town of Texarkana cannot be overstated. The community was plunged into a state of absolute, unprecedented panic. The invisible border that separated the Texas side from the Arkansas side meant nothing in the face of this shared threat. Fear was the new unifying force. As news of the masked killer and his brutal methods spread, a collective hysteria took hold of the residents. The concept of safety completely evaporated. People realized that the quiet, peaceful town they thought they knew had been infiltrated by a monster who hunted in the dark. The reaction of the citizens was swift and desperate. Survival became the only priority. A sudden and massive surge in the demand for self-defense swept through Texarkana. Local hardware stores and sporting goods shops were completely overwhelmed by crowds of terrified citizens. The shelves were rapidly stripped bare as residents bought up every available firearm and every single round of ammunition they could find. People who had never held a gun in their lives were suddenly arming themselves, desperate for any sense of protection against the faceless threat. The local economy briefly transformed into an economy of fear, where weapons, heavy-duty locks, and security hardware became the most sought-after commodities. Residents spent their days reinforcing their homes, installing new deadbolts, nailing windows shut, and creating makeshift barricades. The sanctuary of the home was heavily fortified, transformed into a fortress designed to keep the darkness at bay. The most profound shift in the town occurred every single day as the late afternoon transitioned into evening. The natural setting of the sun, once a beautiful and peaceful transition, became a terrifying countdown. As the shadows grew longer and the light began to fade, a heavy silence fell over Texarkana. The town effectively shut down. Businesses closed their doors early, the streets emptied of pedestrians, and a strict, self-imposed curfew took effect. People rushed back to their homes, locked themselves inside, and waited anxiously in the agonizingly slow hours of the night. No one dared to venture outside after dark. The vibrant life of the town was completely suffocated by fear. Texarkana literally became a town that dreaded the sunset, paralyzed by the knowledge that the phantom killer owned the night. Recognizing the unprecedented scale of the crisis, law enforcement agencies mobilized in a desperate attempt to stop the slaughter. The local Texarkana police departments from both the Texas and Arkansas sides worked frantically, but the sheer elusive nature of the killer proved to be an overwhelming challenge. The situation escalated to the point where the legendary Texas Rangers were called in to take control of the sprawling investigation and restore order to the panicked region. The authorities implemented drastic measures to secure the area and hunt down the phantom. Heavy, armed patrols scoured the streets and the rural outskirts of the town from dusk until dawn. Police cruisers and ranger vehicles became a constant, visible presence in the night, their headlights sweeping across the dark roads and abandoned lovers' lanes. The authorities established strict checkpoints along the highways and dirt roads throughout the border region, stopping and questioning anyone caught moving after dark. The level of law enforcement saturation was unprecedented for the area. Every available resource was poured into identifying the man beneath the white sack. Detectives chased down countless leads, interviewed hundreds of nervous citizens, and analyzed every minute detail of the crime scenes. The entire law enforcement apparatus of 2 states was focused solely on bringing the killer to justice and ending the reign of terror. Yet, despite the massive manhunt, the heavy patrols, and the desperate vigilance of an entirely armed population, the phantom killer simply vanished. The 10 weeks of bloodshed eventually ceased as abruptly as they had begun, leaving behind a profound absence of answers. The lack of a resolution created a deep, festering wound in the heart of Texarkana. The victims' families were denied justice, and the town was denied closure. The white sack became a permanent symbol of the unknown, a haunting reminder that terrible things can happen without explanation and that monsters can walk away unpunished. The case remained stubbornly, tragically unsolved, securing its place as one of the most chilling open investigations in the history of American crime. Decades would pass, but the shadow of the phantom killer never truly lifted from the region. The trauma of that spring became permanently woven into the cultural fabric and local folklore of Texarkana. The terrifying reality of the unsolved murders, the stark image of the white sack, and the profound psychological paralysis of the community eventually transcended local history to become a dark legend. The sheer, terrifying atmosphere of a community holding its breath every single night served as the direct and potent inspiration for the iconic 1976 horror film, The Town That Dreaded Sundown. The cinematic portrayal brought the nightmare of Texarkana to a global audience, immortalizing the tragedy and the absolute terror of those 10 weeks. But behind the cultural legacy and the folklore, there remains the sobering, unalterable truth of the victims. 5 young people who drove out into the spring night seeking nothing but quiet companionship, only to have their lives brutally stolen by an unidentified coward hiding behind a crude piece of cloth. 3 survivors who carried the physical and emotional scars of their encounters for the rest of their days. This is the true, enduring tragedy of the Texarkana Phantom Killer. It is a story of stolen youth, of a community fractured by an invisible enemy, and of a profound, lingering silence where justice should have been. This is the chilling reality of what happened when the sun went down in the spring of 1946. To deeply comprehend the magnitude of the nightmare that descended upon the community during those 10 agonizing weeks, one must first examine the profound sense of place and time that defined the victims and their surroundings. The spring of 1946 was a period characterized by a collective, national exhalation of relief. The devastating global conflict of the Second World War had recently concluded, and a palpable wave of optimism was sweeping across the American landscape. The town of Texarkana was absolutely no exception to this resurgence of hope. Uniquely situated directly on the geographical border between the states of Texas and Arkansas, this settlement functioned as a single, tightly interwoven community, despite the invisible state line that arbitrarily divided its governance. It was a traditional, close-knit environment where neighbors intimately knew one another, where front doors were routinely left unlocked against the warm spring air, and where the concept of a random, faceless predator was entirely alien to the local consciousness. The citizens of Texarkana were focused on rebuilding their lives, on economic prosperity, and on fostering the next generation of youth who were meant to inherit the peace that had been so dearly secured. The town represented an idealized vision of post-war stability, a sanctuary where violence was considered a distant memory from foreign shores rather than a present, creeping reality in their own backyards. At the very heart of this optimistic future were the young people of Texarkana. These were the teenagers and young adults whose lives were just beginning to unfurl, characterized by the innocent, traditional pursuits of courtship, weekend social gatherings, and the simple, profound joy of newfound freedom. In this specific historical era, the automobile was not merely a utilitarian mode of transportation. It was a powerful, coveted symbol of independence for the youth. It offered an immediate escape from the watchful, often crowded households of the post-war period, providing a mobile, intensely private sanctuary. Because privacy was virtually non-existent within the bustling family home, young couples naturally and predictably sought out locations where they could be entirely alone together. This fundamental, innocent desire for intimacy and quiet connection gave rise to the cultural phenomenon of the lovers' lanes. These were not officially designated parks or well-lit municipal areas, but rather quiet, unpaved stretches of rough dirt and gravel roads located on the extreme rural, wooded fringes of the town limits. Flanked by dense thickets of towering pine trees and shrouded in the natural, heavy darkness of the countryside, these isolated spots were universally understood by the community to be the unofficial designated territories of young romance. They were quiet, secluded corners of the world where couples could park their vehicles, cut the engine, and lose themselves in quiet conversation, innocent affection, and the gentle embrace of the weekend evening. However, the geographical isolation that made these rural roads so incredibly attractive to the young couples of Texarkana was, tragically, the exact element that rendered them entirely and fatally defenseless. When a vehicle was parked on a deserted lover's lane, it effectively existed in a temporary vacuum, completely disconnected from the safety, the illumination, and the immediate assistance of the town center. The dense, surrounding woods absorbed the ambient sounds of the night, and the total absence of streetlights plunged the immediate environment into an absolute, disorienting darkness. For the young men and women sitting comfortably in the front seats of their cars, this heavy darkness felt like a protective, comforting blanket, shielding their budding relationships from the intrusive eyes of the outside world. They possessed a profound, ultimately naive trust in their community and in the fundamental goodness of their familiar surroundings. The concept of an inherent, lethal danger lurking within the borders of their own hometown was completely absent from their minds. When they drove out to the rural edges of Texarkana on those fateful Friday and Saturday nights, their thoughts were exclusively consumed by the excitement of youth, the thrill of mutual affection, and the promise of a peaceful, romantic evening. They were entirely, catastrophically unprepared for the grim reality that the isolation they so eagerly sought was simultaneously being hunted by a predator with unimaginable, violent intentions. The stark contrast between the profound innocence of these victims and the calculated, cold malice of the perpetrator remains one of the most harrowing aspects of the entire ordeal. The Phantom Killer understood the inherent vulnerability of the lovers' lanes with chilling clarity. He recognized that these young couples, enclosed within the metal frames of their stationary automobiles, were essentially trapped in isolated boxes once the surrounding darkness was breached by an external threat. The victims were not selected for who they were as individuals, nor for any personal grievance. They were chosen strictly for what they represented. They were vulnerable, highly distracted targets situated in a completely defenseless position, far removed from any potential rescue. As the unidentified killer moved silently through the dense tree line, deliberately approaching the parked vehicles under the total cover of the night sky, he was violently stepping into a world that belonged exclusively to youth and peace, bringing with him an overwhelming atmosphere of absolute terror. The couple sitting inside the cars were completely oblivious to the approaching, lethal threat until the very last, terrifying fraction of a second. Their focus was entirely on one another, their natural survival senses completely dulled by the profound safety they mistakenly believed they possessed in their hometown. The sudden, violent shattering of this romantic illusion marks the precise, tragic moment when the town of Texarkana was violently stripped of its innocence forever. The visual manifestation of the attacker was specifically, cruelly designed to strip away all traces of human empathy and replace it with pure, paralyzing, unadulterated dread. When the unsuspecting victims finally registered the horrific presence of another human being standing just outside their vehicle, they were not met with the face of a desperate, recognizable local criminal or a common vagrant. Instead, they were confronted by a literal nightmarish apparition that defied all logic. The killer had deliberately and carefully concealed his identity by pulling a plain, crude white cloth sack completely over his head. Two small, jagged holes had been roughly cut into the fabric, providing him with a terrifyingly restricted field of vision while entirely obscuring his own features. This makeshift, primitive mask was a brilliant, horrifying psychological weapon. It instantly robbed the victims of any ability to read the attacker's facial expressions, to attempt to plead for mercy to a human face, or to potentially identify him to authorities later. The stark, blinding white fabric contrasting sharply with the deep black of the rural night created a jarring, almost supernatural image that immediately induced a profound state of cognitive shock. Before a single threatening word was spoken or a physical blow was ever struck, the victims were already psychologically overwhelmed and paralyzed by the sheer, unnatural horror of the faceless, silent figures staring at them intensely through the fragile glass of their car windows. This immediate psychological domination was instantly reinforced and solidified by the lethal introduction of a firearm. The killer did not rely solely on the terrifying element of visual surprise or his imposing, disguised physical presence. He actively utilized a gun to establish immediate, absolute, and unyielding control over the highly volatile situation. For the young couples, the sudden, shocking sight of a deadly weapon in the hands of a masked, silent stranger completely and instantly eliminated any potential possibility of physical resistance, negotiation, or flight. The comfortable, intimate confines of the automobile, which had felt so comforting and secure just mere moments before, instantly and violently transformed into a claustrophobic, inescapable metal trap. There was nowhere to run in the dense woods, nowhere to hide in the small cabin of the car, and absolutely no one in the remote vicinity to hear their desperate cries for help. The brandished gun ensured complete, terrified compliance from the victims, allowing the masked killer to methodically dictate the horrific, violent sequence of events that would immediately follow. The transition from a peaceful, romantic spring evening to a brutal nightmare of desperate survival was instantaneous and absolute, leaving the young men and women entirely at the terrible mercy of a predator who possessed absolutely none. Once the killer had successfully secured absolute, terrifying control over the parked vehicle and its trapped occupants, he initiated a highly specific, repetitive, and exceptionally brutal sequence of targeted violence. According to the strict parameters of his methodology, the male victims were systematically targeted first, subjected to savage, unyielding, and overwhelmingly violent physical assaults. The sheer ferocity of these beatings was not merely a tactical means of temporarily subduing the young men. It was a deliberate exercise in extreme, punitive violence intended to completely and permanently incapacitate them. The killer used overwhelming physical force to brutally break their bodies and entirely neutralize their natural instinct to protect their partners. The profound, lingering tragedy of this specific methodology lies deeply in the agonizing emotional torture inflicted upon the male victims. As they physically endured horrific, life-threatening trauma, they were simultaneously forced to experience the devastating, crushing realization that they were utterly powerless to defend the young women they cared for against this monster. The brutalization of the young men was the first horrifying, necessary step in a carefully orchestrated ritual of destruction, Designed specifically to eliminate any potential physical threat before the killer escalated his terrifying, lethal campaign against the female victims. If the extreme violence directed at the young men was heavily defined by its savage physical brutality, the trauma deliberately inflicted upon the young women was characterized by the absolute, ultimate violation of their autonomy, their bodies, and ultimately, their lives. After successfully neutralizing the male victims through extreme force, the faceless, silent killer turned his full, horrific attention directly to the women. The undeniable data surrounding these 10 weeks of terror paints a grim, unyielding, and profoundly disturbing picture of his specific methodology. The female victims were subjected to severe, terrifying sexual assault and rape, enduring unimaginable physical and psychological violation at the hands of the masked phantom in the dark woods. The killer violently stripped these young women of their dignity, their safety, and their basic humanity in the most cruel manner possible. However, the absolute cruelty of the attacker did not conclude with the sexual assaults. To ensure their permanent, eternal silence and to finalize his horrific, violent design, the killer then callously and fatally shot the female victims. This grim, unvarying progression, originating from the sudden, terrifying appearance of the white sack, moving to the violent incapacitation of the men, and culminating in the sexual violation and eventual cold-blooded murder of the women, defines the horrifying, specific modus operandi that successfully paralyzed the entire border region. The sheer, unprecedented scale of the devastation inflicted upon the dual-state community over such a remarkably short period of time remains incredibly difficult to fully comprehend. In the compressed span of just 10 agonizing weeks, a period that should have been joyously defined by the blooming of spring flora and the optimistic celebration of post-war civilian life, the phantom killer methodically carried out 4 separate, completely devastating attacks. The grim arithmetic of this localized violence is incredibly chilling. 5 young, innocent people, their entire lives brimming with unfulfilled potential, were brutally murdered in the dark, isolated woods surrounding their beloved hometown. 3 other individuals managed to miraculously survive the horrific ordeal, but their physical survival came at an immense, incalculable, and lifelong cost. They were left to endure severe, debilitating physical injuries and the profound, enduring psychological trauma of having looked directly into the hollow, dark eyes of the white sack and witnessed the ultimate, violent destruction of their companions. A tragic total of 8 victims, representing 8 families that were fractured forever, and an entire, once peaceful community completely plunged into a suffocating state of collective mourning and inescapable, paralyzing fear. The temporal boundary of these brutal crimes, a highly concentrated window of merely 10 weeks, adds a profoundly suffocating layer of intensity to the overall tragedy. For the specific victims involved in the later attacks, there was a deeply added dimension of psychological horror. By the time the 3rd and 4th vicious attacks occurred, the entire region of Texarkana was already acutely, terrifyingly aware of the phantom killer's undeniable existence. The young couples who were tragically targeted towards the latter end of this grim timeline likely recognized the horrifying white sack immediately, not just as a terrifying aberration in the night, but as the absolute, confirmed harbinger of their own impending, violent doom. The initial, paralyzing confusion experienced by the very first victims was tragically replaced by a cold, absolute certainty of death for those who unfortunately followed. The unknown killer operated with a terrifying, ruthless efficiency within this incredibly tight time frame, demonstrating a dark compulsion for extreme violence that absolutely refused to be satiated until it abruptly and inexplicably ceased. This precise 10-week period became a permanently defined epic of blood, sorrow, and unspeakable terror, a localized reign of violence that systematically and brutally dismantled the innocent youth of the town, weekend by agonizing weekend. While historical accounts often focus heavily on the tragic finality of the deceased victims, the immense, lifelong burden carried by the 3 survivors demands profound and respectful acknowledgement. To survive an intimate encounter with the phantom killer was to be cruelly condemned to a completely different kind of perpetual, waking darkness. These resilient individuals were forcefully required to navigate the entire remainder of their natural lives, bearing not only the severe physical scars of their brutal beatings, but also the deep, invisible, and permanent lacerations upon their psychological well-being. They were the tragic, living witnesses to the ultimate nightmare, the absolute only individuals who had stood directly on the precipice of pure evil and had been violently pulled back, forever fundamentally altered by the experience. Their remarkable survival did not automatically grant them peace. Rather, it tethered them permanently and inescapably to the terrifying memory of the cold metal of the firearm, the rough, crude fabric of the white sack, and the horrific, unforgettable sounds of extreme violence that heavily echoed through the isolated pine woods. They became the tragic, living, breathing embodiments of a town's absolute darkest chapter, quietly carrying the heavy, solitary weight of a brutal truth that could never fully be resolved, adequately explained, or righteously avenged by the authorities. The innocent victims of Texarkana, encompassing both the tragically fallen and the burdened surviving, remain the silent, tragic center of a profound American mystery that continues to deeply haunt the cultural landscape to this very day. The chronological unfolding of the 4 attacks across those 10 spring weeks in 1946 stands as a methodical, terrifying escalation of violence that systematically broke the heart of Texarkana. The initial incident occurred on a quiet weekend night in the early stages of the 10-week window, at a time when the residents of the dual-state town still believed their secluded rural roads were completely safe sanctuaries for young courtship. A young couple had driven out to one of the traditional lovers' lanes located on the unpaved, wooded fringes of the town, parking their automobile beneath the thick, dark canopy of pine trees to talk and spend time together away from the bustling community. The atmosphere inside the vehicle was peaceful, completely detached from any thought of danger, as the couple focused entirely on each other in the quiet darkness. Beyond the glass windows of the automobile, the surrounding woods were thick, dark, and silent, providing complete concealment for anyone moving through the trees. Without any warning, the tranquil silence of the night was shattered as a tall figure emerged silently from the shadowed tree line and approached the parked vehicle. The intruder was wearing a plain, stark white sack pulled completely over his head, with 2 small, crude eye holes cut into the fabric, entirely hiding his human features from view. In his hand, he brandished a firearm, aiming it directly at the terrified couple through the car window. The shocking sight of the white sack in the dim light, combined with the presence of a deadly weapon, instantly established absolute control over the unsuspecting victims, leaving them trapped in their vehicle with no avenue for escape and no ability to summon help from the distant town. With the firearm drawn and the white mask concealing any hint of human emotion, the killer initiated a horrific sequence of physical violence that would immediately become his signature method. He violently confronted the trapped couple, focusing his immediate physical aggression on the young man in the vehicle. Utilizing extreme physical force, the attacker subjected the young man to a severe, merciless beating, inflicting grave bodily trauma designed to utterly overpower and incapacitate him. The brutal assault was relentless and overwhelming, leaving the male victim battered, bleeding, and physically helpless, completely unable to protect his companion or intervene in the terror that followed. Having effectively neutralized the male victim through extreme violence, the masked figure turned his full attention toward the young woman. He subjected her to a terrifying physical assault and horrific sexual violation, stripping away her dignity and safety in the dark woods. In this initial incident, despite the extreme physical trauma and severe injuries inflicted upon both individuals, both victims miraculously survived the horrific encounter. Bloodied, broken, and deeply traumatized, they were left behind in the dark as the masked attacker vanished silently back into the surrounding pine woods. The survival of these 2 young people provided the very first account of the White Sack Phantom to local authorities, delivering a chilling warning to the police and introducing the horrifying reality of a masked predator stalking the quiet lovers' lanes of Texarkana. Rather than retreating after the first assault, the Phantom Killer struck a second time on a subsequent weekend, escalating his campaign of terror from severe violence to cold-blooded, fatal murder. Once again, the setting was a secluded lover's lane on the isolated outskirts of town, where another young couple had parked their automobile in the quiet darkness of the evening. Completely unaware of the horrific assault that had previously occurred or the deadly danger lurking in the night, the couple sat in their parked car, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere of the spring weekend. Out of the surrounding woods, the killer materialized without a sound, his head enclosed in the same terrifying white cloth sack with crude eye holes, a firearm held firmly in his hand. Approaching the parked vehicle, he used the weapon to instantly trap and terrorize the occupants. In this second attack, the killer carried out his violent methodology with absolute, lethal finality. He brutally beat the young man, inflicting severe physical trauma to completely disable him before turning his aggression toward the young woman. After subjecting the female victim to sexual assault and rape, the attacker escalated his violence to its ultimate conclusion by drawing his firearm and shooting the victims. When the horrific ordeal ended, both the young man and the young woman had been fatally wounded, their lives brutally stolen in the dark woods. The discovery of their lifeless bodies marked the first 2 deaths attributed to the Phantom Killer, sending a wave of profound shock and terror through the entire community as the town realized a lethal murderer was roaming their streets. As the weeks progressed within the 10-week time frame, the Phantom Killer struck for a 3rd time, demonstrating a terrifying persistence and an unwavering adherence to his brutal pattern. Operating under the cover of darkness on another weekend night, he once again selected his targets in a remote, poorly lit lovers' lane situated along the border region between Texas and Arkansas. Another young couple, seeking a quiet moment of privacy in their parked car, became the next victims of the faceless predator. The sudden appearance of the white sack at the car window, illuminated only by the faint moonlight, immediately plunged the couple into a state of profound psychological terror. Sticking precisely to the method he had established in the previous attacks, the killer utilized his handgun to maintain absolute command over the situation. He unleashed a savage physical assault on the male victim, beating him mercilessly until he was rendered completely helpless and severely injured. With the young man incapacitated, the masked attacker turned his attention to the female victim, subjecting her to a horrific sexual assault in the dark, isolated setting. To ensure no witnesses remained and to complete his dark work, the perpetrator then opened fire with his gun, shooting the victims and inflicting fatal wounds. This 3rd incident added 2 more tragic deaths to the growing toll, raising the number of fatalities to 4 and firmly establishing that a serial killer was operating with complete impunity across the borderland. The 4th and final attack occurred towards the conclusion of those 10 agonizing weeks, bringing the Phantom Killer's campaign of violence to its ultimate, tragic peak. By this point in the spring of 1946, Texarkana was gripped by widespread panic, with residents taking extreme precautions and police forces patrolling the streets. Yet, despite the heightened fear and increased vigilance throughout the region, the killer managed to find another opportunity to strike in the rural outskirts near the town's border region. Choosing another isolated location where an automobile was parked in the dark, the attacker approached under the cover of night, his face hidden behind the iconic white sack with its 2 eye holes, a weapon held ready in his hand. The sudden, violent ambush caught the occupants completely off guard, trapping them within the small space of the car. The killer executed his familiar, brutal sequence, using overwhelming force to beat and incapacitate the male victim before turning his terrifying aggression toward the female victim, subjecting her to severe violence and sexual assault. In the violent chaos that followed, the attacker fired his gun at the victims before disappearing into the darkness. When help finally arrived at the scene, it was discovered that one of the victims had succumbed to fatal gunshot wounds, while the other had miraculously survived despite sustaining grave, life-threatening injuries. This 4th strike resulted in 1 more murder and 1 more survivor left severely wounded, bringing the final tally of the killer's 10-week spree to a heartbreaking climax. When examining the 4 distinct incidents that occurred during those 10 weeks in the spring of 1946, the full scope of the Phantom Killer's devastation becomes terrifyingly clear. In total, the perpetrator carried out 4 separate, highly organized attacks on young couples parked in secluded lovers' lanes around Texarkana. Across these 4 events, 5 young individuals lost their lives, their bright futures cut short by cold-blooded murder, while 3 others survived severe, brutal attacks that left them with grave physical injuries and enduring psychological trauma. 8 total victims were caught in the path of a single, faceless predator who hid his identity behind a crude white sack with 2 eye holes. The progression of these incidents showed a chilling consistency in methodology. The sudden approach at night with a firearm, the immediate psychological terror of the white mask, the brutal beatings inflicted on the men to eliminate any chance of defense, and the horrific sexual violence and shootings directed at the women. Each incident left behind a trail of blood, broken lives, and profound sorrow, systematically turning the romantic, quiet lovers' lanes of Texarkana into scenes of unforgettable tragedy. These 4 attacks, condensed into a brief 10-week period, created a wave of fear so intense that it fundamentally altered the daily life of the entire town, leaving an indelible mark on the history of the border region. The unfolding of 4 brutal attacks in a brief 10-week span pushed the local law enforcement agencies of Texarkana into an unprecedented crisis, forcing them to mobilize every available resource in a desperate race against time. Because Texarkana was uniquely situated directly on the border between Texas and Arkansas, the investigation immediately encountered complex jurisdictional challenges that complicated coordination during the early stages of the manhunt. The Texarkana Police Department on the Texas side and the department on the Arkansas side had to find a way to work seamlessly together across state lines, sharing information, pooling manpower, and attempting to map out the movements of a predator who treated the state boundary as an invisible and meaningless line. Local detectives fanned out across the quiet neighborhoods and rural outskirts, interviewing hundreds of panicked residents, checking local businesses for any unusual purchases of ammunition or white fabric, and exhaustively searching every reported lead that came into the station. Every rumor, every sighting of a suspicious individual, and every piece of circumstantial evidence was thoroughly evaluated by investigators who were under immense pressure from a terrified public demanding answers and immediate protection. Despite the tireless efforts of the local police forces, the Phantom Killer remained frustratingly elusive, leaving behind very little physical evidence at the 4 remote crime scenes and successfully slipping away into the dark woods before authorities could arrive. Recognizing that the local departments were overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the terror and the extraordinary elusiveness of the suspect, the authorities made the crucial decision to call in the legendary Texas Rangers to take command of the sprawling investigation. The arrival of the Texas Rangers brought a renewed sense of authority, specialized expertise, and relentless investigative rigor to the case, transforming the manhunt into a massive, highly coordinated multi-agency operation. Investigators from the Rangers, alongside local law enforcement officers and county sheriffs from both states, established a joint command center to streamline communication and analyze the growing mountain of investigative notes. The detectives meticulously reconstructed every detail of the 4 attacks, comparing the timing, the precise locations of the lovers' lanes, the nature of the ballistic evidence, and the consistent modus operandi of the perpetrator. They analyzed the firearm used in the assaults, attempting to trace the weapon or match bullet casings, while also investigating potential suspects who possessed a local knowledge of the rural geography. The forests, dirt roads, and isolated corners of the border region were scoured by teams of law enforcement officers searching for discarded items, clothing, or anything the killer might have left behind during his hurried escape. The investigation became a round-the-clock operation, with detectives working tirelessly through sleepless nights, driven by the urgent necessity to unmask the man behind the white sack before he could strike for a 5th time. As the investigation deepened, the sheer lack of physical clues began to weigh heavily on the minds of the lead detectives, presenting a frustrating roadblock that tested the limits of 1946 forensic science. Unlike modern criminal investigations equipped with DNA profiling, advanced digital forensics, and sophisticated surveillance networks, the investigators of 1946 had to rely entirely on traditional police work, witness testimonies, physical surveillance, and circumstantial evidence. The survivors of the attacks, though carrying profound physical and psychological trauma, were interviewed extensively by detectives in the hope of extracting any faint detail that could help construct a reliable suspect profile. However, the killer had meticulously engineered his approach to minimize identification. The blinding white cloth sack completely obscured his facial features, the darkness of the rural nights hindered visibility, and the sudden, overwhelming violence of the ambushes left the victims in a state of cognitive shock that made precise recollections extraordinarily difficult. The survivors could describe his height, his build, and his aggressive demeanor, but none of them could provide a recognizable face. This absence of a clear physical description, combined with the complete lack of identifiable fingerprints or reliable forensic traces at the crime scenes, meant the investigation was heavily dependent on tracking down tips and interrogating a long list of local persons of interest. The pressure to identify a suspect led the authorities to cast a wide net across Texarkana and the surrounding rural counties, bringing in numerous individuals for questioning based on suspicious behavior, past criminal records, or tips provided by anxious citizens. Detectives investigated local residents, transient workers passing through the border region, and returning military veterans who might have been suffering from the psychological fallout of the war. Each person of interest was subjected to rigorous background checks, alibi verification, and intense interrogation by seasoned investigators determined to find a crack in their story. One by one, however, these leads were thoroughly investigated and ultimately dismissed as suspects were able to account for their whereabouts during the times of the attacks or lacked any connection to the specific methodology of the Phantom Killer. The exhaustive process of chasing dead ends created a palpable sense of frustration within the investigative task force. As the weeks ticked by and the terrifying 10-week window of violence came to an abrupt halt, the sudden cessation of the attacks did not bring comfort to the detectives. Rather, it left them operating in a strange vacuum, wondering if the killer had permanently left the area, if he was simply waiting for the panic to subside before striking again, or if he had already been mistakenly overlooked among the hundreds of individuals questioned during the height of the manhunt. In addition to traditional investigative tactics, law enforcement implemented an unprecedented level of visible security across Texarkana to deter any potential future attacks and to reassure the deeply panicked civilian population. Armed patrols saturated the streets, highways, and rural dirt roads from dusk until dawn, transforming the quiet town into a heavily guarded zone where law enforcement presence was a constant, inescapable reality of daily life. Police cruisers and Texas Ranger vehicles crept through the darkness of the rural outskirts, their bright headlights cutting across the isolated lovers' lanes and abandoned pathways where the previous tragedies had unfolded. Checkpoints were established at strategic locations along the border region, where officers stopped vehicles moving after dark, questioned drivers, and searched for anything suspicious. This massive show of force required enormous coordination between the agencies of Texas and Arkansas, demonstrating a unified front against a common enemy that transcended state lines. The constant hum of police sirens, the flashing lights in the night, and the sight of armed officers patrolling every corner of the town served as a daily, grim reminder of the Phantom Killer's lingering shadow, keeping the community on high alert even as the active violence temporarily paused. The investigative files accumulated during those intense weeks in 1946 swelled with thousands of pages of notes, witness statements, suspect profiles, and forensic reports, yet the core mystery remained stubbornly impenetrable. Detectives pursued every conceivable angle, re-interviewing witnesses, analyzing ballistic matches, and re-examining the secluded crime scenes in the daylight, searching for any overlooked detail that might point toward the identity of the man in the white sack. The case became one of the most high-profile and thoroughly investigated crimes in the history of the region, drawing intense media attention from regional newspapers and broadcasting outlets that kept the nation fixated on the terrified border town. Despite the relentless dedication of the Texas Rangers and local police officers, the trail eventually grew cold as months turned into years without a definitive breakthrough or an airtight case against any single individual. The inability to officially charge or convict the perpetrator left a permanent scar on the investigative legacy of Texarkana, turning the active manhunt into an enduring historical mystery. The meticulous steps taken by the authorities, from the initial chaotic response to the massive coordinated patrols and the exhaustive interrogation of suspects, ultimately could not pierce the anonymity of the Phantom Killer, leaving the case permanently inscribed in the annals of unsolved American crimes. The complete absence of a definitive suspect and the permanent failure to bring the perpetrator to a formal trial remains one of the most frustrating and tragic dimensions of the Texarkana Phantom Killer case. Because the identity of the man behind the white sack was never definitively uncovered during the active investigation, the formal judicial process, the traditional avenue through which society seeks accountability, truth, and closure for victims of heinous crimes, was entirely bypassed. In the months and years following the terrifying spring of 1946, law enforcement agencies continued to chase lingering rumors and investigate sporadic tips that surfaced across the border region, but none of these leads ever materialized in a solid, actionable evidence strong enough to build an airtight case for a grand jury. The legal system, which relies heavily on physical proof, verifiable witness identifications, or a verifiable confession, found itself utterly stymied by a crime spree specifically designed by its perpetrator to leave behind as little tangible evidence as possible. The lack of a courtroom trial meant there was no formal reading of charges, no dramatic cross-examination of a captured suspect, and no public presentation of the state-gathered evidence before a jury of peers. This absence of a legal reckoning denied the victims, the surviving individuals, and the grieving families the public validation and definitive closure that a formal judicial proceeding typically provides. Without a suspect standing trial, the community was left with a lingering vacuum where justice should have been served, permanently consigning the investigation to the frustrating category of an officially unsolved case. The closest the historical record ever came to a formal legal accusation involved a local man named Yowell Swint, whose name frequently surfaced in discussions surrounding the Texarkana mystery due to his suspicious background and criminal history within the region. Authorities investigated Swint extensively during and after the primary wave of violence, scrutinizing his movements, checking his possible alibis, and attempting to find any direct connection between him and the 4 brutal attacks perpetrated in the isolated lovers' lanes. However, despite the intense suspicion directed toward him by investigators and fearful members of the public, the authorities ultimately lacked the necessary physical evidence, ballistic matches, or eyewitness verifications required to formally charge him with the crimes. The legal standard of proof demanded far more than circumstantial suspicion or generalized local notoriety, and because law enforcement could never legally link Swint, or any other individual investigated during the exhaustive manhunt, to the murders, no formal arrest warrant could be sustained in a court of law. This legal reality meant that the criminal justice system could not offer a definitive resolution, leaving the case suspended indefinitely in a state of legal limbo. The inability to prosecute a suspect transformed the unsolved nature of the crimes from a temporary investigative hurdle into a permanent historical reality, ensuring that the legal files would remain perpetually open while gathering dust in archive rooms across the Texas and Arkansas border. The profound absence of a trial or a judicial verdict had a lasting, psychological impact on the social fabric of Texarkana, as the community was forced to process its collective trauma without the catharsis of a legal conclusion. In a typical criminal case of such magnitude, a public trial serves as a vital societal mechanism for transitioning a community from a state of acute panic and vulnerability to a state of restored order and eventual healing. The public spectacle of a perpetrator being held legally accountable allows victims' families to witness the machinery of justice turning in their favor, providing a symbolic closure that helps heal deep emotional wounds. Because the Phantom Killer case never reached a courtroom, the residents of Texarkana were denied this essential psychological milestone. The fear that had gripped the town during those 10 weeks in 1946 did not dissipate through the righteous triumph of a legal verdict. Instead, it slowly dissolved into a quiet, enduring unease that remained embedded in the local consciousness. People were forced to accept the unsettling reality that the man who had terrorized their streets, hidden behind a crude white sack with 2 eye holes, had seemingly vanished into thin air without ever having to answer for his horrific actions before a judge or a jury. This lack of judicial closure left a permanent, unresolved fracture in the history of the dual-state town, ensuring that the memory of the unsolved murders would continue to cast a long, heavy shadow over future generations. The legal fallout of the investigation also highlighted the profound limitations of mid-20th century criminal justice when confronted with an organized, elusive predator operating across complex jurisdictional boundaries. The division of Texarkana into 2 separate states, Texas and Arkansas, created bureaucratic and legal hurdles that complicated the initial response and hindered the seamless coordination of investigative efforts. While the legendary Texas Rangers eventually stepped in to unify the command structure and bring high-level expertise to the sprawling manhunt, the jurisdictional friction experienced during the critical early days of the case demonstrated how easily a clever criminal could exploit the administrative cracks between different law enforcement agencies. Detectives from both states had to navigate differing legal protocols, coordinate separate evidence-handling procedures, and reconcile conflicting departmental jurisdictions while operating under the intense pressure of a terrified, demanding public. These systemic challenges underscored the urgent need for enhanced multi-agency cooperation and modernized investigative techniques in future cross-border criminal cases. The inability of the legal and law enforcement apparatus to secure an indictment or bring a suspect to trial served as a sobering reminder of the formidable obstacles investigators faced in an era before centralized criminal databases, advanced forensic science, and seamless interstate communication networks. Ultimately, the failure to achieve a legal resolution in the Texarkana Phantom Killer case shifted the burden of memory entirely onto the cultural folklore and historical legacy of the region, divorced from the traditional accountability of the courtroom. Without a convicted criminal to anchor the narrative of the crimes, the public imagination naturally filled the void with speculation, local legends, and an enduring fascination with the sheer anonymity of the killer. The legal system had closed its active files due to a lack of prosecutable evidence, but the community itself could never truly close the book on an event so profoundly disruptive to its collective identity. The absence of a trial meant that the true identity of the man in the white sack was permanently surrendered to history, transforming a series of horrific, localized crimes into an enduring American true crime enigma. The victims and their families were left to find their own paths toward healing, carrying the immense weight of a tragedy that was never officially vindicated by a legal verdict. As the decades passed, the lack of a judicial conclusion became the defining characteristic of the case, ensuring that the Texarkana Phantom Killer would remain forever unidentified, legally unpunished, and permanently etched into the collective memory as a haunting reminder of justice left unfulfilled. The passage of decades can alter the physical landscape of a town, paving over dirt roads, modernizing storefronts, and replacing old buildings with new architecture, but it cannot easily erase the deep psychological scars left by an unprecedented collective trauma. For the border town of Texarkana, the spring of 1946 remained a permanent dividing line in its history, separating the era of quiet, innocent security from the post-war epoch defined by caution and the haunting memory of the unknown. The terror brought by the Phantom Killer did not simply vanish when the 10-week spree abruptly ended. Instead, it settled deep into the cultural subconscious of the community, transforming how generations of residents viewed their own neighborhoods, their quiet nights, and the vulnerable spaces at the edge of town. A town that had once taken pride in its neighborly trust and open doors was forced to reckon with the harsh reality that absolute evil could emerge from the darkness without warning, leave behind a trail of shattered lives, and disappear back into the shadows without ever facing earthly justice. This enduring legacy of unresolved fear became an invisible weight carried quietly by the residents who lived through those terrifying weeks and passed down through hushed stories to their children and grandchildren, ensuring that the Phantom Killer would never truly be forgotten. The immediate aftermath of the 10-week reign of terror required the community to slowly rebuild its sense of normalcy out of the ashes of profound panic, though the recovery was neither swift nor complete. In the months following the final attack, as the heavy law enforcement patrols gradually thinned and the checkpoints along the state line were dismantled, the daily routines of Texarkana resumed on the surface, yet an undercurrent of hypervigilance remained firmly entrenched in the daily lives of the citizens. The self-imposed curfews and the frantic rush to fortify homes during the twilight hours gradually softened into more moderate safety habits, but the psychological shift was permanent. Parents raised their children with new, unwritten rules about the dangers of the dark, cautioning them against wandering too far into the isolated rural areas or lingering alone on the unpaved roads where the tragedies had occurred. The lovers' lanes that had once served as carefree sanctuaries for young courtship lost their innocence entirely, becoming heavy with dark associations and whispered warnings. People no longer looked at the thick pine forests surrounding the town with simple appreciation for nature. Instead, the dense tree lines were viewed through a lens of lingering unease, as silent witnesses to a dark chapter that had never found legal closure or meaningful resolution. As years turned into decades, the tragic events of that spring evolved from contemporary news and active police investigations into local folklore, anchoring themselves firmly in the regional identity of the dual-state border community. The details of the attacks, the crude white sack with two eye holes, the blinding flash of the firearm in the dark, the savage beatings, and the heartbreaking loss of young lives, became part of the dark historical tapestry of Texarkana. While historians and true crime researchers continued to analyze the case files in search of overlooked clues, the local residents grappled with the surreal nature of having been the epicenter of one of America's most chilling unsolved mysteries. The anonymity of the perpetrator became the central pillar of this enduring folklore, feeding a perpetual cycle of speculation, amateur sleuthing, and whispered theories that spanned generations. Yet, beneath the sensationalism that naturally accumulated around an unsolved serial killer case, the core tragedy remained remarkably stark and sobering. The folklore was not merely a campfire tale designed to frighten teenagers. It was a memorialized record of real human suffering, representing 5 young individuals whose futures were violently stolen and 3 survivors who carried lifelong burdens in relative silence. The grim legacy of the Texarkana Phantom Killer ultimately transcended the boundaries of local folklore to secure a permanent place in American cinematic history, most notably through the creation of the 1976 horror film, The Town That Dreaded Sundown. This cinematic adaptation brought the harrowing atmosphere of those 10 weeks in 1946 to a national audience, dramatizing the intense panic of the community, the relentless manhunt led by law enforcement, and the terrifying actions of the masked predator. While dramatic license was naturally employed to shape the historical events into a cohesive narrative structure, the film successfully captured the suffocating dread that had paralyzed the dual-state town as day turned into night. For many people across the country, their first introduction to the Texarkana mystery came through the flickering screen, cementing the haunting image of the white cloth sack in the public imagination. However, for the residents of Texarkana who watched the film, the cinematic portrayal served as a visceral and painful reminder of the real-world terror their community had endured. It reopened old emotional wounds, forcing the town to confront once again the dark legacy of a killer who had never been caught, while simultaneously immortalizing their unique place in the dark annals of true crime history. Reflecting upon the entirety of the Texarkana Phantom Killer case reveals a deeply unsettling meditation on the fragility of human safety and the limitations of justice in the face of profound, anonymous malice. The 10-week spree's brutal efficiency demonstrated how quickly a peaceful, trusting community can be plunged into absolute chaos by a single individual operating outside the boundaries of human empathy. The victims, young men and women seeking nothing more complex than quiet companionship on a pleasant spring weekend, were caught in a random, devastating crossfire of violence that defied rational explanation. Their stories serve as a solemn reminder of lives cut short before they could truly begin, demanding that history remember them not merely as statistics in an unsolved case file, but as vibrant human beings whose dreams and potential were violently extinguished in the dark woods. The survivors, too, stand as testaments to endurance, carrying the invisible weight of trauma through decades of quiet resilience, bearing witness to a nightmare that the rest of the world could eventually watch as a movie or read about as history, but which they were forced to live through and carry forever. Equally significant in the reflection of this dark historical chapter is the sobering reality of the investigation's ultimate outcome, or lack thereof. The inability of law enforcement agencies, despite massive coordination, relentless patrols, and exhaustive interrogations, to formally identify, charge, or convict the perpetrator highlights the frustrating truth that not every dark mystery receives a neat, righteous conclusion in a courtroom. The legal system, bound by strict standards of proof and burdened by the limitations of mid-20th century investigative tools, was forced to leave the case permanently unsolved, turning the Phantom Killer into an enduring symbol of justice left unfulfilled. This lack of judicial closure leaves a permanent question mark hanging over the history of Texarkana, a haunting reminder that monsters can walk among ordinary people, inflict unspeakable damage, and slip away into the anonymity of history without ever paying for their crimes. The open files and police archives across Texas and Arkansas stand as silent testaments to a case that remains perpetually unfinished, waiting for answers that will likely never arrive. Ultimately, the story of the Texarkana Phantom Killer is much more than a classic true crime narrative about a series of brutal, unsolved murders. It is a profound study of how a community confronts and absorbs unimaginable darkness. The spring of 1946 tested the resilience of Texarkana in ways its founders could never have anticipated, forging a collective identity shaped as much by sorrow and fear as it was by post-war optimism and recovery. The town survived the 10 weeks of terror, locking its doors against the sunset and standing resiliently together in the face of an invisible enemy. But it was fundamentally and irreversibly changed by the experience. The white sack with its crude eye holes remains an enduring symbol of nameless evil, a chilling reminder of the nightmarish vulnerability that exists when the lights go out and the shadows lengthen across the quiet roads of America. As the decades continue to pass and the memory of that terrifying spring fades from living generations into the realm of timeless history, the tragic victims of Texarkana deserve to be remembered with profound empathy, solemn respect, and an unyielding commitment to honoring their humanity above the dark legend of the phantom who hunted them in the dark. The enduring resonance of the Texarkana Phantom Killer case within the broader landscape of American true crime history extends far beyond the confines of its initial 10-week terror in 1946, establishing itself as a foundational archetype for the modern obsession with unsolved mysteries. Long before the term serial killer was formally coined, and decades before the advent of modern behavioral analysis, institutional profiling, or nationwide law enforcement databases, the unnamed perpetrator in the white sack operated with a chilling premeditation that prefigured the most notorious predators of the late 20th century. Yet, unlike many subsequent cases that eventually found resolution through confessions, forensic breakthroughs, or courtroom verdicts, the Texarkana mystery remains suspended in a permanent state of ambiguity, inviting endless examination by historians, criminologists, and generations of true crime enthusiasts. This persistent fascination is driven not merely by the macabre imagery of the crude white mask or the shocking violence of the rural ambushes, but by the deeply unsettling reality of a ghost who slipped effortlessly between two states, committed unspeakable acts, and vanished completely without ever leaving behind a traceable human identity. The case occupies a unique space in the American consciousness, serving as a dark mirror that reflects how society confronts the terrifying possibility of random, motiveless evil operating right at the edge of ordinary, peaceful communities. As decades have given way to a new century, the passage of time has transformed the physical evidence and the paper trails of the original investigation into archival artifacts. Yet the human dimensions of the tragedy remain profoundly potent for the families of those affected. The descendants of the victims and the relatives of the survivors carry an invisible inheritance of sorrow, shaped by the historical silence that settled over the case after the active police investigation stalled. For these families, the Phantom Killer is not a distant cinematic legend or an abstract puzzle to be solved on a true crime podcast, but a flesh and blood monster who violently fractured their family trees during a season that was supposed to symbolize post-war renewal and hope. The lack of a legal resolution meant that closure could never be found in the traditional manner of a gavel falling in a courtroom or a guilty verdict read aloud before a hushed audience. Instead, generations have had to internalize the grief, wrestling with the knowledge that the person responsible for destroying their loved ones lived out their natural life unpunished, perhaps walking the very streets of Texarkana or quietly blending into another town without ever experiencing a single moment of accountability. This generational trauma underscores the enduring collateral damage of violent crime, proving that the expiration of active police leads does not equate to the healing of a community or the quiet resting of a family's restless questions. The evolution of forensic science and investigative technology over the past half-century has frequently cast a hopeful light on cold cases from eras past, offering the tantalizing promise that modern DNA profiling or advanced ballistic matching might finally unmask historical monsters. However, the Texarkana investigation presents a uniquely frustrating barrier to these modern aspirations, primarily due to the severe limitations of evidence collection and preservation during the chaotic weeks of the 1946 manhunt. The primitive forensic standards of the mid-20th century, combined with the rushed and overwhelming nature of the crime scene responses across dual-state jurisdictions, meant that physical trace evidence was rarely preserved with the meticulous care required for modern molecular analysis. While archival boxes containing police notes, grainy photographs, and aged witness statements still slumber in regional storage facilities, the biological and physical materials capable of yielding a definitive DNA profile are largely non-existent or severely degraded by decades of environmental exposure and improper handling. Consequently, investigators and amateur sleuths who revisit the case today are perpetually walled off by the insurmountable gap between contemporary technological capabilities and the crude, transient nature of the evidence left behind in the dark, isolated lovers' lanes. This technological impasse ensures that the identity of the Phantom Killer remains protected by the very era in which he operated, preserving his anonymity as an unbreakable shield forged in the shadows of the post-war spring. The persistent cultural fascination with the Texarkana mystery also brings to light a critical ethical responsibility shared by all storytellers, journalists, and historians who choose to revisit the dark chapters of human suffering. The imperative to prioritize human empathy over mere sensationalism. It is remarkably easy for a case involving a masked assailant, a series of midnight ambushes, and an unsolved manhunt to be reduced to a thrilling campfire tale or an entertaining piece of dark entertainment designed to elicit a cheap adrenaline rush. Yet, behind the chilling mythology of the white sack and the sensationalized cinematic depictions lie real, breathing human beings whose lives were unimaginably precious and whose sudden, violent deaths constituted an irreplaceable loss. The 5 young people who perished, and the 3 who survived to carry the permanent, heavy burdens of their trauma, deserve to be remembered not merely as pawns in a grim narrative puzzle, but as individuals with distinct personalities, unfulfilled dreams, and grieving families who love them. Maintaining this respectful focus on the victims is the ultimate safeguard against the unethical romanticization of criminality, ensuring that the retelling of the tragedy serves as a solemn act of remembrance rather than a callous exploitation of human pain. When we speak of the Texarkana Phantom Killer, our primary allegiance must always remain with the innocent youth who drove out into the spring night, seeking nothing more than the quiet warmth of companionship, only to encounter a nightmare from which they could never return. The broader societal impact of the Texarkana reign of terror extends deeply into the collective psychology of how modern communities perceive safety, vulnerability, and the hidden dangers that can lurk just beyond the glow of municipal streetlights. The prompt and profound panic that seized the dual-state town in 1946 demonstrated how rapidly the veneer of civilization can fracture when confronted with an invisible, unpredictable predator. The immediate transformation of Texarkana into a fortified town of locked doors, armed residents, and self-imposed curfews serves as a timeless illustration of the human instinct for self-preservation in the face of profound, existential dread. Even today, decades after the patrols have ceased and the checkpoints have vanished, the psychological blueprint of that fear persists in the cultural DNA of suburban and rural American communities. Whenever an isolated road is avoided after dark, whenever a vehicle parked in a secluded spot draws a nervous glance, or whenever a community holds its breath in the wake of an inexplicable tragedy, the ghost of the Texarkana Phantom Killer is quietly invoked. It is a lingering reminder that the boundaries between absolute peace and absolute terror are remarkably thin, sustained only by the fragile, collective trust we place in one another, a trust that was so brutally and irrevocably shattered during those 10 weeks in the spring of 1946. As this comprehensive exploration of the Texarkana Phantom Killer draws to its solemn close, we are left to confront the profound, unalterable silence that defines the heart of the mystery. The open files resting quietly in the archives of Texas and Arkansas will likely never be stamped with a solved marker, And the man who pulled a coarse white sack over his head to hide his face from his victims will almost certainly remain forever nameless to history. But while justice may have eluded the courtroom, and the identity of the perpetrator may be permanently lost to the fog of time, the legacy of the tragedy endures as a powerful testament to human resilience and the sacred importance of memory. The town of Texarkana survived its darkest season, rebuilding its fractured identity and carrying the heavy weight of its history with quiet, enduring dignity. The young lives stolen in the dark woods can never be restored, and the trauma borne by the survivors can never be completely erased, but they are honored whenever we pause to remember their humanity, to validate their suffering, and to refuse to let their stories fade into oblivion. This is the ultimate truth of the Texarkana Phantom Killer, a chilling narrative of darkness and fear, balanced eternally by the unwavering, enduring light of human empathy, remembrance, and survival. As we step back and survey the vast, sprawling landscape of American true crime history, the case of the Texarkana Phantom Killer stands out not merely as a relic of a bygone era, but as a profound, chilling archetype of the unknown predator. The spring of 1946 introduced a brand of terror that permanently altered the psychological topography of the United States, proving with brutal clarity that safety is often an illusion sustained by the fragile trust we place in our surroundings. In an epoch when communities across the nation were eagerly turning the page toward post-war prosperity, industrial growth, and familial renewal, the unpaved roads and secluded lovers' lanes of a quiet dual-state town became the hunting ground for a faceless entity wrapped in a crude white sack. This stark contrast between the bright optimism of the post-war American dream and the pitch-black horror of the midnight ambushes created a narrative dissonance that has continued to captivate historians, criminologists, and storytellers for nearly 8 decades. It is a stark reminder that history is not solely defined by the grand victories and societal progress we proudly celebrate, but also by the dark, unresolved chasms where justice failed, where answers were never found, and where human lives were abruptly extinguished without reason or remorse. The Phantom Killer remains the ultimate embodiment of the random, motiveless threat, a shadowy figure whose ability to strike swiftly and vanish completely challenges our fundamental need for order, predictability, and closure in a chaotic world. In the decades following those 10 weeks of unmitigated terror, the pursuit of the truth behind the Texarkana mystery has evolved from active police investigation into a persistent, multi-generational obsession shared by amateur sleuths, independent researchers, and true crime historians. Armed with digitized newspaper archives, public domain police records, and historical maps of the dual-state border region, modern investigators continue to comb through the microscopic details of the 4 attacks, searching for anomalous clues or overlooked connections that might shed new light on the identity of the man in the white sack. Theories and speculative suspect profiles have multiplied across books, documentaries, and digital forums, with each new generation attempting to solve a puzzle that baffled the most seasoned Texas Rangers and local detectives of 1946. Yet, despite the tireless efforts of these modern-day sleuths, the core obstacle remains stubbornly insurmountable: the absolute scarcity of reliable, verifiable physical evidence. The primitive forensic standards of the mid-20th century, combined with the chaotic and overwhelming nature of the initial crime scene responses, ensured that the trail would grow permanently cold, leaving behind an impenetrable wall of anonymity that protects the perpetrator even now. This enduring mystery demonstrates the frustrating limitations of historical investigation, where the passage of time transforms tangible clues into ghost stories, and where the truth is forever obscured by the fog of decades past. Beyond its status as an enduring true crime enigma, the Texarkana manhunt served as a brutal, transformative catalyst for the evolution of American law enforcement practices, exposing critical vulnerabilities in cross-jurisdictional cooperation that had previously gone unnoticed. In 1946, the arbitrary geographical division between the state of Texas and the state of Arkansas created a bureaucratic maze that severely hindered the early stages of the investigation, allowing an elusive predator to exploit the administrative gaps between separate police departments. The friction between local agencies and the eventual intervention of the legendary Texas Rangers underscored the vital necessity of unified command structures, seamless information sharing, and coordinated multi-agency task forces when confronting serial criminality that respects no state lines. The lessons learned from the chaotic weeks of the Phantom Killer's reign directly influenced how modern law enforcement agencies approach regional threats, paving the way for advanced interstate communication networks, centralized criminal databases, and standardized forensic protocols that ensure modern investigators are never similarly hamstrung by state boundaries. In this sense, the tragedy in Texarkana acted as a harsh, unforgiving crucible that forced the machinery of criminal justice to modernize, adapting its strategies to meet the evolving tactics of transient, predatory criminals who utilize geography as a shield against accountability. Yet, amidst the technical analyses, the evolving policing strategies, and the endless cultural fascination with the legend of the Phantom Killer, we must never lose sight of the profound, unalterable human cost that anchors the entire narrative in enduring sorrow. For the families of the 5 young people who lost their lives and the 3 survivors who carried the heavy physical and psychological burdens of their brutal assaults, the case was never an intellectual puzzle to be solved or a thrilling piece of entertainment to be dissected. It was a shattering, life-altering catastrophe that fractured family trees, stole away bright futures, and left behind a permanent vacuum of grief that could never be filled by historical speculation or cinematic portrayals. The absence of a courtroom trial or a formal judicial verdict meant that these families were denied the essential societal catharsis of seeing a perpetrator held legally accountable, forcing them to process their profound losses in the quiet, agonizing solitude of an unsolved reality. The true legacy of the Texarkana tragedy is written not in the archives of police departments or the reels of horror films, but in the enduring resilience of those who survived and the solemn remembrance of those who perished, reminding us that every cold case represents a human life of infinite value whose story was cut tragically short in the dark woods. As Texarkana itself has grown, modernized, and evolved over the passing generations, the town has had to forge a complex, resilient relationship with its dark historical moniker, balancing the community's vibrant present with the haunting legacy of the spring of 1946. The physical landscape where the attacks occurred has gradually changed. Dirt roads have been paved over, new neighborhoods have expanded into the rural fringes, and the dense pine forests have yielded in places to commercial and residential development. Yet the regional consciousness remains permanently tethered to the memory of the white-sacked phantom. The cinematic immortality conferred by the 1976 horror film, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, cemented the town's grim status in the national imagination, transforming local history into enduring cinematic folklore. For the residents who grew up in the shadow of this dark legacy, the story of the Phantom Killer became a part of the regional identity, passed down through generations as both a chilling local legend and a solemn reminder of a time when their streets were gripped by paralyzing fear. Through it all, the dual-state community demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for healing and endurance, refusing to let the terror define the entirety of its existence while maintaining a quiet, respectful awareness of the tragic history that unfolded beneath the moonlight during those 10 unforgettable weeks. In drawing this comprehensive exploration of the Texarkana Phantom Killer to its final, resonant conclusion, we are reminded of the fragile boundary that separates the ordinary, peaceful rhythms of daily life from the sudden, terrifying descent into inexplicable darkness. The mystery of the man in the white sack remains unsolved, his true identity swallowed permanently by the fog of history, and the open files in the archives of Texas and Arkansas will likely never bear the satisfying stamp of justice fulfilled. But while the courtroom door remains closed and the perpetrator has escaped earthly retribution, the true power of this haunting narrative lies in our collective commitment to remembering the victims with profound empathy, unwavering respect, and deep human dignity. They were young individuals who drove out into the spring night, seeking nothing more complex than the innocent warmth of companionship, only to encounter a nightmare that defied all human reason. By telling their stories, by honoring the survivors, and by confronting the uncomfortable truths of an imperfect justice system, we ensure that their lives are never forgotten amidst the sensationalism of true crime folklore. This is the ultimate truth of the Texarkana Phantom Killer, a chilling testament to the capacity for human evil, balanced eternally by the enduring, unbreakable light of remembrance, empathy, and survival when the sun goes down and the shadows lengthen across the quiet roads of America. As the relentless march of time carries us further away from the terrifying spring of 1946, the mystery of the Texarkana Phantom Killer continues to occupy a uniquely haunting space in the architecture of American criminal history. It is a case that defies easy categorization, refusing to neatly tuck itself away into the comfortable archives of solved crimes where justice has been served, a perpetrator has been unmasked, and a community has been granted the absolute closure of a courtroom verdict. Instead, the investigation remains permanently suspended in a state of open-ended ambiguity, a historical wound that never fully scarred over because the identity of the monster behind the white sack was swallowed entirely by the shadows of the past. For historians, criminologists, and dedicated true crime researchers who continue to pore over the aged, yellowed pages of police ledgers and witness statements, the fascination is not merely driven by the macabre elements of the midnight ambushes or the chilling visual of the crude mask. Rather, it is fueled by a profound, nagging intellectual discomfort, the unsettling realization that a violent predator can materialize out of the dark, inflict devastating, irreparable harm upon a peaceful town, and then dissolve back into ordinary society without ever leaving a definitive trace of his human identity. This complete and utter erasure of the perpetrator transforms the Texarkana case into a timeless symbol of the vulnerability inherent in human existence, reminding us that there are dark corners of the human psyche and moments in history where chaos reigns supreme, untouched and unpunished by the mechanisms of law. The enduring resonance of this case also serves as a fascinating mirror for the evolution of true crime as a cultural phenomenon and a method of historical inquiry. In the decades immediately following the Second World War, the media landscape was vastly different from the hyper-connected, digital environment we navigate today. News traveled through regional newspapers, radio broadcasts, and word of mouth, allowing local tragedies to sometimes remain localized curiosities rather than becoming instant global sensations. Yet, the sheer brutality and unprecedented nature of the Phantom Killer's sprees transcended regional boundaries, gripping the national imagination and laying the foundational tropes that would eventually populate the modern true crime genre. The isolated lovers' lanes, the unsuspecting couples seeking quiet romance, the sudden terrifying flash of a weapon in the dark, and the chilling anonymity of a masked assailant are motifs that have since been endlessly recycled, dramatized, and mythologized in popular culture, horror cinema, and investigative literature. By examining how the Texarkana tragedy has been retold, analyzed, and commemorated over the passing generations, we gain valuable insight into how society processes fear, how we construct narratives around incomprehensible violence, and how we utilize storytelling as a collective mechanism to grapple with the darkest aspects of human behavior. Yet, this cultural fascination carries an inherent ethical hazard: the constant temptation to elevate a grim historical reality into mere entertainment, stripping away the raw, agonizing human pain of the victims to satisfy a morbid curiosity. Guarding against this exploitation requires a steadfast, unwavering commitment to centering our focus where it truly belongs: on the lives that were shattered and the enduring dignity of those who survived to carry the heavy burden of memory. When we return our gaze from the broader cultural legacy back to the specific, intimate reality of the dual-state border community, the true weight of the tragedy settles heavily upon the heart. Texarkana was not merely a convenient backdrop for a sensationalized campfire story or a fictionalized cinematic thriller. It was a real, vibrant, tight-knit town populated by ordinary people who had just emerged from the global shadow of a devastating world war, eager to embrace the simple joys of peace, community, and familial renewal. The young individuals who drove out to the rural, unpaved roads on those fateful spring weekends were not reckless thrill-seekers courting danger. They were sons, daughters, friends, and sweethearts whose only crime was seeking a brief moment of quiet privacy in an era when private spaces were a rare and cherished commodity. The sudden, violent disruption of their lives by a faceless predator wielding a firearm and a white cloth sack represents the ultimate betrayal of the foundational trust that allows a community to function. The fact that these young people were selected entirely at random, targeted not for who they were as individuals, but simply because they occupied a vulnerable position in the dark, makes the violence even more chillingly arbitrary and difficult to comprehend. It strips away any illusion of control, forcing us to confront the terrifying reality that safety is a fragile construct, easily fractured by the sudden emergence of a malice that operates completely outside the boundaries of human empathy and social convention. The psychological footprint left upon the survivors of these horrific attacks remains one of the most poignant and often overlooked chapters of the Texarkana mystery. While historical accounts and true crime narratives frequently prioritize the dramatic climax of the murders and the subsequent frantic manhunt led by the Texas Rangers, the three individuals who miraculously survived their brutal encounters were forced to navigate a profoundly different kind of enduring struggle. To live through an intimate, violent confrontation with the Phantom Killer was to be permanently tethered to a nightmare that the rest of the world could eventually read about in history books or watch on a movie screen, but which they were forced to carry inside their minds and bodies for the remainder of their natural days. They bore not only the severe, debilitating physical scars of merciless beatings and gunshot wounds, but also the invisible, profound lacerations of psychological trauma, the hypervigilance, the recurring nightmares, and the haunting, inescapable memory of the hollow eyes staring through the jagged holes of a crude white sack. Their remarkable resilience in the face of such overwhelming darkness deserves our utmost respect and solemn acknowledgement. For they were the true, living custodians of a painful truth that could never be neatly resolved by an arrest or a trial. Their quiet endurance stands as a powerful testament to the human capacity to survive unimaginable cruelty, reminding us that even when justice is denied by the limitations of a legal system, the human spirit can find a way to endure, to heal, and to carry forward the sacred duty of remembrance. Equally compelling when reflecting upon the entirety of this historical chapter is the profound institutional frustration experienced by the law enforcement agencies tasked with stopping the bloodshed. The mid-20th century investigators, comprising local police officers from both the Texas and Arkansas sides of Texarkana alongside the legendary, hardened operatives of the Texas Rangers, faced an uphill battle against logistical and technological limitations that modern detectives would find almost unfathomable. Operating in an era long before the advent of computerized criminal databases, cellular tracking, instantaneous nationwide communication networks, and sophisticated DNA profiling, these investigators were forced to rely exclusively on traditional police work, painstaking foot patrols, physical surveillance, and the notoriously unreliable recollections of traumatized witnesses. The jurisdictional friction caused by the state line dividing the town added a layer of bureaucratic complexity that a clever, transient predator could easily exploit during the chaotic early days of the manhunt. Despite these formidable obstacles, the authorities poured boundless energy, sleepless nights, and relentless determination into the investigation, establishing armed checkpoints, saturating the rural roads with patrols, and interrogating countless suspects in a desperate effort to unmask the man behind the white sack. The fact that their tireless efforts ultimately fell short of securing a conviction or identifying the perpetrator is a sobering reminder of the sobering truth that not every criminal investigation reaches a tidy, righteous conclusion. It exposes the harsh limitations of justice in the physical world, leaving behind a permanent gap where accountability should have resided, and turning the active case files into a haunting symbol of an unsolved puzzle that time has rendered permanently immutable. As the decades continue to accumulate and the physical landscape of Texarkana evolves to meet the demands of a modern era, the town's relationship with its dark historical legacy has matured into something deeply complex and resilient. The dirt roads where lovers once parked their cars have largely been paved over. New residential neighborhoods have expanded deep into the rural pine forests where the phantom once hunted in the dark, and the daily hustle and bustle of a thriving dual-state community has thoroughly overshadowed the whispers of the past. Yet, despite this outward modernization, the regional consciousness remains inextricably linked to the spring of 1946. The cinematic immortality conferred by the classic horror film adaptation permanently cemented the town's grim status in the national imagination, ensuring that the legend of the White Sack Predator would be passed down from generation to generation as both a chilling local ghost story and a solemn historical reality. For the residents who grew up in the shadow of this legacy, the story serves as a reminder of a time when their streets were gripped by paralyzing fear, when the setting of the sun was a terrifying countdown, and when doors were locked tight against an invisible enemy. Yet, rather than allowing this darkness to define the entirety of their identity, the community of Texarkana demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for healing, rebuilding their collective trust, and forging a vibrant, forward-looking future while maintaining a respectful, quiet awareness of the tragedy that unfolded beneath the moonlight during those 10 unforgettable weeks. In drawing this extensive, deeply reflective exploration of the Texarkana Phantom Killer to its final, resonant conclusion, we are compelled to look past the sensationalism of the true crime folklore and confront the pure, unvarnished human reality at the heart of the narrative. The mystery of the man in the white sack remains unsolved, his true identity swallowed permanently by the fog of history, and the open files resting quietly in the archives of Texas and Arkansas will likely never bear the satisfying stamp of justice fulfilled. But while the courtroom door remains closed and the perpetrator has escaped earthly retribution, the true power of this haunting story lies in our collective commitment to remembering the victims with profound empathy, unwavering respect, and deep human dignity. They were young individuals who drove out into the spring night, seeking nothing more complex than the innocent warmth of companionship, only to encounter a nightmare that defied all human reason. By telling their stories, by honoring the survivors, and by confronting the uncomfortable truths of an imperfect justice system, we ensure that their lives are never forgotten amidst the sensationalism of true crime entertainment. This is the ultimate truth of the Texarkana Phantom Killer, a chilling testament to the capacity for human evil, balanced eternally by the enduring, unbreakable light of remembrance, empathy, and survival when the sun goes down and the shadows lengthen across the quiet roads of America. As we arrive at the ultimate threshold of this exhaustive exploration into the darkest chapter of Texarkana's history, the heavy silence that follows the recounting of these events feels both profound and entirely inescapable. The spring of 1946 remains a frozen monument in time, an era defined not merely by the passage of calendar months, but by an abrupt, violent intrusion of absolute malice into the ordinary, peaceful rhythms of a dual-state community. When we step back to survey the vast landscape of the true crime genre, few cases occupy such a deeply unsettling and permanent niche as the reign of the Phantom Killer. It is a narrative that fundamentally defies the comforting narrative arcs we have come to expect from modern criminal investigations, where clues are meticulously pieced together, suspects are cornered, a dramatic courtroom battle ensues, and society is ultimately granted the restorative catharsis of a definitive verdict. In the case of Texarkana, no such comfort exists. The files resting quietly in regional archives remain perennially open. The trail went permanently cold decades ago, and the man who pulled a coarse white sack over his head to conceal his identity slipped away into the shadows of history without ever facing earthly accountability. This absence of a neat resolution leaves a lingering, persistent ache in the collective consciousness, turning an unsolved local crime spree into a timeless, haunting archetype of the random, motiveless threat that lurks at the edges of human civilization. The enduring resonance of this dark chapter is deeply intertwined with the specific, fragile vulnerability of the setting in which it unfolded. Texarkana was a town uniquely positioned on the geographical border between Texas and Arkansas, a community that prided itself on close-knit neighborly trust, shared commerce, and a post-war optimism that looked forward to a future of peace and renewal. The young people who drove their automobiles out to the secluded, unpaved lovers' lanes on those fateful spring weekends were seeking nothing more complex than the innocent, private warmth of human companionship in an era when private spaces within the bustling family home were virtually non-existent. They were completely unaware that the very isolation that provided them with sanctuary also served as the ideal camouflage for a calculating predator. The sudden, terrifying transition from quiet romance to extreme, unmitigated violence shattered the foundational illusion of safety that sustains small-town life. It proved with brutal efficiency that the boundary between a peaceful community and a waking nightmare is terrifyingly thin, maintained only by the fragile trust we place in one another. A trust that was violently and irrevocably torn apart during those 10 weeks of terror. When we contemplate the victims of the Phantom Killer, our reflection must transcend the cold arithmetic of crime statistics and police reports to honor the genuine human lives that were so abruptly and brutally extinguished. 5 young individuals, full of unfulfilled potential, bright dreams, and deep connections to families who loved them, had their lives stolen in the dark, isolated woods on the edge of town. 3 others survived their horrific ordeals, bearing the severe, debilitating physical scars of merciless beatings and gunshot wounds, while simultaneously carrying the invisible, lifelong burden of profound psychological trauma. They were the living custodians of an unbearable truth, forced to navigate the remainder of their days in the shadow of a masked phantom who left them battered and broken in the quiet night. The fact that these individuals were targeted entirely at random, selected not for who they were as people, but strictly because they occupied a vulnerable position in the path of a predator, adds an extra layer of chilling arbitrariness to the tragedy. They deserve to be remembered not as mere pawns in a sensationalized true crime puzzle or characters in a cinematic legend, but as real, vibrant human beings whose stories were cut tragically short and whose enduring dignity demands our deepest, most unwavering empathy. The institutional legacy of the Texarkana investigation offers an equally sobering lesson in the limitations of justice and the critical importance of law enforcement adaptation. In the spring of 1946, the jurisdictional friction between the state of Texas and the state of Arkansas created bureaucratic hurdles that complicated the initial response and hindered the seamless coordination of investigative efforts during the most critical hours of the manhunt. Operating in an era long before the sophisticated tools of modern forensic science, computerized databases, and instantaneous communication networks, local police officers and the legendary Texas Rangers were forced to rely exclusively on traditional foot patrols, physical surveillance, and the notoriously fragile recollections of traumatized witnesses. Despite their tireless efforts, sleepless nights, and exhaustive interrogations of countless suspects, the immense obstacles proved insurmountable, leaving the investigation permanently stymied by a lack of tangible, prosecutable evidence. This systemic failure highlights a sobering truth about the physical world. Not every dark mystery receives a righteous conclusion in a courtroom. It exposes the harsh reality that justice can sometimes be outpaced by cunning, obscured by the limitations of an era, and left perpetually unfulfilled in the dusty archives of forgotten police files. Beyond its historical and investigative dimensions, the Phantom Killer case holds a profound place in cultural folklore and cinematic history, serving as the direct and potent inspiration for the iconic horror film that brought the nightmare of Texarkana to a global audience. The cinematic portrayal captured the suffocating dread that had paralyzed the dual-state town as day turned into night, immortalizing the stark image of the white cloth sack with its 2 crude eye holes in the public imagination. Yet, for the residents of Texarkana who lived through the actual terror, this cultural fame was a double-edged sword, serving as a painful reminder of a real-world tragedy that reopened old emotional wounds and forced the community to perpetually confront its darkest legacy. The town's ability to absorb this cinematic notoriety while continuing to grow, modernize, and forge a vibrant, forward-looking future is a testament to the extraordinary resilience of its people. They did not allow the 10 weeks of terror to define the entirety of their existence. Instead, they built a resilient, enduring community spirit upon the foundations of sorrow and recovery, transforming a regional trauma into a quiet, respectful awareness of the history that unfolded beneath the moonlight. As we reach the final cadence of this exploration, we are left to ponder the profound, unalterable silence that anchors the heart of the Texarkana mystery. The open files resting quietly in the archives will likely never bear the satisfying stamp of a solved case, and the man who hid his face behind a coarse white sack will almost certainly remain forever nameless to history. But while the courtroom door remains closed and earthly retribution has been permanently denied, the true power of this haunting narrative lies in our collective commitment to remembering the victims with profound empathy, unwavering respect, and deep human dignity. They were young individuals who drove out into the spring night, seeking nothing more than the quiet warmth of companionship, only to encounter a nightmare that defied all human reason. By telling their stories, by honoring the survivors, and by confronting the uncomfortable truths of an imperfect justice system, we ensure that their lives are never forgotten amidst the sensationalism of true crime entertainment. This is the ultimate truth of the Texarkana Phantom Killer, a chilling testament to the capacity for human evil, balanced eternally by the enduring, unbreakable light of remembrance, empathy, and survival when the sun goes down and the shadows lengthen across the quiet roads of America. As we approach the final movement of this extensive exploration into the shadows of Texarkana, the realization settles in that certain stories refuse to be neatly contained by the boundaries of time or the resolutions of a courtroom. The spring of 1946 remains a permanent, immutable monument in the architecture of American true crime, a 10-week epic of unmitigated terror that fundamentally challenged the collective sense of safety of a nation emerging from global conflict. When we reflect upon the vast and complex tapestry of crimes that have tested the resilience of communities throughout history, few retain the haunting, hypnotic grip of the Phantom Killer case. It is a narrative defined not by the triumphant closing of a file or the dramatic delivery of a guilty verdict, but by an enduring, profound silence, a persistent void where accountability should have resided, and where the identity of the man behind the crude white sack remains forever swallowed by the fog of the past. This permanent state of ambiguity transforms the Texarkana mystery from a localized historical event into a timeless archetype of the random, motiveless threat, echoing down through the decades as a chilling reminder of the vulnerabilities that exist when ordinary life intersects with inexplicable, unbridled malice. The passage of nearly 80 years has altered the physical landscape of the dual-state border region significantly, replacing dirt roads with paved highways, transforming rural thickets into modern residential developments, and allowing new generations of residents to build vibrant, forward-looking lives. Yet, despite these outward manifestations of progress and time's natural healing balm, the cultural consciousness of Texarkana remains inextricably tethered to the memories of those 10 terrifying weeks. The cinematic immortality conferred by the 1976 horror film adaptation cemented the town's grim status in the national imagination, ensuring that the silhouette of the white sack predator would be passed down through popular culture as a chilling ghost story. But for the people who call this border region home, the legacy is far more than a piece of cinematic folklore. It is a solemn, deeply respected part of their local history. It represents a time when the natural setting of the sun was a terrifying countdown, when front doors were bolted tight against the dark, and when an entire community stood resiliently together in the face of an invisible, unpredictable enemy. The town's extraordinary capacity to absorb this dark chapter, to honor its sorrow without letting it dictate the entirety of its identity, stands as a powerful testament to human resilience and the enduring strength of a community forged in the crucible of shared adversity. When we consider the broader implications of the investigation's ultimate outcome, we are forced to confront the humbling and often frustrating limitations of the human justice system. In 1940-6, the pioneering detectives of the local police departments and the legendary, hardened operatives of the Texas Rangers faced a monumental task under conditions that modern investigators would find almost impossible to comprehend. Operating long before the advent of computerized databases, instantaneous nationwide communication networks, sophisticated forensic science, and DNA profiling, these law enforcement officers were forced to rely exclusively on traditional foot patrols, physical surveillance, and the notoriously fragile recollections of deeply traumatized witnesses. The jurisdictional friction caused by the state line dividing Texas and Arkansas added a layer of bureaucratic complexity that a clever, transient predator could easily exploit during the chaotic early days of the manhunt. Despite their boundless energy, sleepless nights, and exhaustive interrogations of countless suspects, the immense obstacles proved insurmountable, leaving the investigation permanently stymied by a lack of tangible, prosecutable evidence. This systemic reality exposes the harsh truth that not every dark mystery receives a righteous conclusion in a courtroom, leaving open files and dusty archives as silent, unchanging testaments to a case that time has rendered permanently immutable. Yet, beyond the archives, the forensic limitations, and the true crime lore, The true and lasting weight of the Texarkana tragedy rests entirely upon the human dimension, upon the lives that were violently cut short, and the enduring dignity of those who survived. The 5 young individuals who lost their lives in the dark, isolated lovers' lanes were not abstract statistics or minor characters in a grim narrative puzzle. They were vibrant, promising human beings filled with hopes, dreams, and deep familial bonds. Their sudden, senseless murders robbed them of a future they had barely begun to write, leaving behind grieving families who were permanently denied the catharsis of a legal verdict. Similarly, the 3 survivors who miraculously endured their brutal assaults carried an invisible, heavy inheritance of psychological trauma and physical scars through the remainder of their natural days, serving as the quiet, resilient custodians of a painful truth that the rest of the world could only read about as history. By keeping our focus centered firmly on these individuals, we resist the callous temptation to reduce real human suffering to mere entertainment, ensuring that our exploration serves as a solemn act of remembrance and an unyielding commitment to honoring their humanity above the dark legend of the phantom who hunted them in the dark. The enduring fascination with the Texarkana mystery also reveals a fundamental aspect of human psychology: our deep-seated need for order, closure, and narrative resolution in a chaotic world. When confronted with an event as profoundly disruptive and inexplicable as a masked serial killer who vanishes without a trace, the human mind naturally seeks to fill the void with theories, speculations, and endless analysis. This intellectual drive is what fuels the vibrant true crime community, inspiring generations of independent researchers, amateur sleuths, and historians to re-examine the aged, yellowed pages of police ledgers in search of an overlooked clue or a hidden connection that might finally unmask the culprit. While this persistent inquiry keeps the historical conversation alive, it also serves as a constant reminder of the elusive nature of absolute truth in historical investigations. The man in the white sack remains protected by the primitive forensic standards of his era and the absolute scarcity of reliable physical evidence, ensuring that his true identity will likely never be known. This permanent, unresolved status forces us to accept a degree of existential discomfort, acknowledging that some questions in human history are destined to remain unanswered, and that the search for justice must sometimes find its fulfillment not in the punishment of the guilty, but in the faithful, enduring remembrance of the innocent. As we draw this comprehensive exploration to its final, solemn close, we are left to contemplate the quiet grace that follows a deep journey into historical darkness. The open files resting quietly in the archives of Texas and Arkansas will likely never bear the satisfying stamp of a solved case, and the phantom killer will forever remain nameless to history, a shadow swallowed by the passage of time. But while earthly retribution was denied and the courtroom doors remained closed, the legacy of Texarkana endures as a profound testament to the power of memory, empathy, and survival. The young individuals who drove out into the spring night, seeking nothing more complex than the quiet, innocent warmth of human companionship, deserve to be remembered with absolute reverence, their unfulfilled dreams held safely in our collective consciousness. Their stories remind us of the fragile beauty of our daily lives, of the deep responsibility we share to protect one another, and of the unyielding light of human empathy that continues to shine long after the sun has set and the shadows have lengthened across the quiet roads of America. This is the ultimate, enduring truth of the Texarkana Phantom Killer, a chilling testament to the capacity for human darkness, balanced eternally by the unbreakable, sacred light of human remembrance and survival.